The warp stirred like a living ocean, its waves folding over themselves in endless silent thunder. Colorless lightning rippled through the psychic storm, and across its shifting horizon, a soundless pulse began to beat. It was not the laughter of demons, nor the rage of gods. It was colder mathematical an echo that repeated with mechanical precision. The entities that ruled this infernal sea paused in confusion. Khorne's throne trembled as droplets of spectral blood rose from his chalice. Tzinchi's fires faltered mid-dance, coiling inward as if to listen. Even the great game hesitated, for the new vibration did not belong. It was foreign, intrusive, and pure. Far beyond the Imperium, aboard the cathedral ships of the Imperium, astropaths screamed in unison. Their minds, wired to receive the tides of thought and dream, were flooded by a rhythm unlike anything human or divine. The Inquisition's black ships went dark as navigators tore at their temples, muttering of geometry inside light. On Titan's frozen moon, the Grey Knight's librarians gathered around a holosphere of the sector. Within its projection flickered the same sequence, 7 pulses, then silence repeating endlessly. To them it was a code, a warning written in frequency rather than sound. But to something far older, it was a summons. Across the void, drifting within the carcass of a ruined star system, the mad Titan opened his eyes. The remnants of the Infinity Gauntlet rested on a slab before him, its cracked stones pulsing faintly in rhythm with the same 7-beat pulse. Thanos stared, unblinking. For years he had sought balance, believing the elimination of half of all life would restore meaning to existence. Yet even in triumph, the universe had remained restless. Now, in this strange pulse, he sensed a call that mocked his earlier efforts of harmony greater than death itself. He raised the gauntlet, and the fractured gems glimmered like dying suns. Space bent slightly, as if the cosmos were leaning toward the same sound. In that same moment, on a world far from any charted map, the black citadels of Apokolips shook. Priests of Darkseid assembled within the Basilica of Omega, their eyes turned toward the void beyond their god's throne. The walls flickered with shaped suns blooming and collapsing in reverse, timelines folding like ribbons. A pattern, murmured Darkseid, tracing the air, a rhythm traveling backward through time. From his obsidian throne, Darkseid rose. The Omega symbol on his chest burned with dull crimson light. He had felt it for weeks, a foreign pulse that did not bow to his will. It had traveled across realities, bypassing every law of existence. Now it was inside the anti-life equation itself, resonating through its mathematics like a parasite. He clenched his fist, and reality around him distorted, revealing a holographic projection of galaxies trembling along the pulse's path. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of inevitability. Something seeks dominion through order, he said. Not chaos. Not emotion. Calculation. The priests lowered their heads, sensing the same truth another intellect had reached into their universe, one that viewed creation as a formula to perfect. Darkseid's eyes narrowed, not in anger but recognition. A mirror, he whispered. A rival or a reflection. The pulse intensified. Throughout the warp, demons screamed as the Imperium itself began to synchronize. The chaos gods roared, yet their power faltered, their chaos found pattern, their infinity found rhythm. In that impossible instant, the warp and the physical universe became one symphony of vibration, every particle vibrating in unison. Ships across the Imperium went silent. Vox networks crackled with whispers of unknown origin. Even the Emperor's psychic light dimmed for a heartbeat. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the pulse ceased. The silence that followed was absolute. In the ruins of his ship, Thanos exhaled, the gauntlet dimming at his side. He looked toward the distant Eye of Terror, its crimson swirl faint against the black. "Show yourself," he murmured. Light from the dying stars flickered across his armor, reflecting a faint violet gleam in his eyes. On Apokolips, Darkseid stood beneath the fading projection, his gaze piercing the same void. "Who dares seek perfection without me?" he said softly. For the first time in eons, his tone held curiosity instead of command. The universe trembled between them, unseen yet aware, as two wills, one of balance, one of domination, turned toward each other across realities. The first thread of destiny tightened, invisible yet unbreakable, as the cosmos prepared for its greatest convergence. The star system was ending, not with a scream but with a tired exhale. Planets dragged ragged tails of dust as they sank toward a cooling sun, and in the darkness between their failing orbits drifted a single vessel scarred, silent, without destination. Inside, Thanos moved without armor. The plates slept on a rack like the shed skin of a serpent. His fingertips found only ash along the bulkhead, the residue of a life spent measuring loss. Once, worlds rose and fell at the lift of that hand. Now it hovered, uncertain, as if waiting for permission to matter. On the central dais, the gauntlet waited. Its surface was cracked, its sockets, webbed with fissures, held stones that pulsed faintly as if dreaming. When he lifted it, memory returned like cold water. Cities dimming in neat halves, lovers weeping to a metronome of grief, victory that tasted of metal and snow. He had balanced the scales with surgical devotion, and still the universe had leaned back toward hunger. The stones thrummed not command, but after Mathand the sound felt like an accusation that would not resolve. He sealed the gauntlet to his hand, not to wield it, but to listen. Beyond the hull, the 7-beat pulse he had sensed repeated, thinner now, like a signal crossing ancient ice. He set a course by instinct, letting the ship slick along gravity's ruins. Rings of shattered stations drifted like wedding bands broken on purpose. Palaces lay open to vacuum. Temples kept their candles lit behind crazed glass, tiny flames refusing to learn the language of space. In the hush between beacons, he admitted a thought he had never allowed. Perhaps balance imposed from above is only stillness with a prettier name. The ship glided past a world covered in statues. Basalt giants stood shoulder to shoulder around the equator, each bearing a bowl filled with ash. He remembered this place. Mercy had been measured here to the molecule, and the planet had called it salvation. Now mercy had hardened into quiet. No children ran among the bowls. No songs threaded the valleys. The stones fluttered like dying birds and settled, as if unwilling to wake the dead twice. Through debris mist and the last storms of a failing sun, a whisper threaded the instruments, not a voice, not quite, but intention sculpted into rhythm. It did not promise power, it promised an answer. He followed, and the stars thinned as though the void itself were clearing a path. To mark time, he spoke aloud. Not to a crew there was none but to the ghosts that had named him savior and monster in the same breath. He recited the worlds he had judged and the debts he could not repay, and the ship seemed to listen without asking him to stop. Far from trade lanes, he crossed a field of god corpses. Titans, petrified into mountains, drifted in slow procession, crowns broken, spears shedding comets of ice. Priests had promised him once that gods were the answer to fear. Seeing them emptied of thunder, he wondered whether fear had been the answer to gods. He angled the vessel between two ribcages and felt the hull shiver under the weight of unspent prayers. The pulse deepened, vibrating through struts and bone and the tiny fractures veining each stone. Ahead, the eye of terror uncoiled from the dark noosphere. No boundary, only a wound in the idea of distance. Colors bled inward, swallowed by a red not found on any spectrum. The gauntlet's light synchronized with the bleeding horizon. He had closed his hand around destiny once and called it mercy. Now the word tasted thin. Power had carried him this far, comprehension would have to carry him farther. He stood at the viewport, a solitary figure among ghosts of choices, and exhaled as if learning to breathe. Engines woke with a patient murmur. He lowered his head, not in prayer, but in admission. The Titan who judged worlds now sought judgment. With a final glance at the dying sun, Thanos turned his vessel toward the wound in the universe and advanced steadily, willingly into the place where even death learned to keep its voice low. Apokolips was never silent. It was a world that breathed fire and exhaled despair, its surface a furnace of blackened metal and red rivers that ran with molten waste. The sky was a constant wound-scarlet smoke twisting into pillars where lightning never stopped burning. Each roar of the planet's forges was a prayer, and every prayer was a scream. The slaves toiled in rhythm, their chants rising above the machinery. Darkseid is. Their words were not devotion, they were survival, the repetition of inevitability. In the heart of the inferno, atop a tower that pierced the clouds of ash, Darkseid sat upon his throne. From there he could see the endless labor of his world cities shaped like engines, people shaped like fuel. His empire stretched across galaxies, a design of perfect control. And yet, behind his granite gaze, there flickered something rarer than rebellion: exhaustion. The god who had conquered everything sat surrounded by silence that only victory brings. The anti-life equation pulsed faintly across the air before him, a lattice of symbols drifting like embers. It had revealed to him the truth of all things: how thought could be shackled, how freedom was the illusion that kept life wandering in circles. But truth, once absolute, turned hollow. When nothing defies you, even eternity becomes repetition. His priests knelt below the dais, their heads bowed to the scorched floor. They had long ago stopped praying for favor their god needed none. Only one dared to raise his voice, the seer of obsidian flame, his body marked with data brands that glowed faintly through his ashen skin. "My lord," he whispered, trembling, "the cosmos speaks in frequencies unmeasured. The walls between realms ripple." The air thickened. Darkseid's eyes flared crimson, burning 2 straight lines into the darkness. "Show me," he commanded. The seer extended a trembling hand, projecting a constellation of unstable stars into the air. They pulsed in perfect rhythm, 7 beats, then silence. "The sound is felt, not heard," the seer said. "It bends gravity, thought, even time. My calculations suggest it originates beyond the known multiverse." Darkseid rose. The movement alone sent cracks through the floor. "Another universe," he said slowly, "dares to pulse without my consent." His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of collapse. He descended the steps, his presence making the seer's skin crack and smoke. No power should move without intention. "This," signaled does it think. The seer hesitated, then whispered, "It feels as though it does, my lord." For a moment, Darkseid was silent. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was a small, terrible thing, like a mountain deciding to lean. "Perhaps meaning returns," he said. He lifted a single hand, and the walls of the hall bent outward as reality folded under his will. Across the planet, the furnaces dimmed, even the Parademons froze mid-flight. His command reverberated through every molecule of Apokolips. "Prepare the bridge." The priests scattered, activating ancient devices buried in the planet's core. Beams of energy arced toward the void, carving an opening through layers of existence. The warper realm, unknown to their science, answered like an echo, bleeding crimson light through the portal. Its surface rippled, showing brief visions of impossible geometries and screaming stars. Darkseid stepped forward, his form silhouetted against the light. To his subjects, it looked as though the universe itself bowed to let him pass. He paused only once at the threshold, turning his gaze to the horizon. "Perfection is nothing without contrast," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Perhaps beyond lies something imperfect enough to matter." And with that he stepped through. The rift swallowed him whole. Time around Apokolips folded like metal under pressure, suns dimmed across 1,000 light years. For a heartbeat, the multiverse held its breath as the god of tyranny crossed its boundaries. Somewhere far ahead, in the cold path leading to the Eye of Terror, a pulse answered him, recognition between equals. The throne of ashes stood empty, its fire dimming in awe of what had just awakened. The Eye of Terror did not wait for visitors, it devoured them. Yet when Thanos approached, it hesitated, as if recognizing a kindred will. The boundary between matter and madness dissolved around his vessel. Metal wept, atoms lost allegiance, and the gauntlet on his hand hummed like a tuning fork resonating with eternity. The ship drifted until it no longer knew what space was. Thanos stood alone on a deck that melted into mist, watching the universe stretch and tear like parchment soaked in bloodlight. He did not feel fear. He felt symmetry. He stepped forward. The ship disintegrated behind him, scattering into sparks that joined the storm. Each spark carried a whisper, echoes of the souls who had died in his name. They swirled around him in mournful orbit, their shapes fleeting. A soldier saluting, a mother holding nothing, a child reaching upward. He bowed his head once, not in remorse, but in recognition. The warp answered by sculpting a path beneath his feet, a shifting bridge of light that coalesced only when he moved. Every step was an act of creation. The ground rippled with memories that weren't his own, fragments of wars long past, worlds consumed by their own prayers. A broken moon rose and fell again in seconds, dissolving into a red horizon that breathed. Thanos looked toward it, sensing that the signal he had followed for months lived at its center. The pulse returned, deep and slow, reverberating through the airless void. From within that pulse, a silhouette emerged. Darkseid walked as though gravity obeyed him alone. The space beneath his boots flattened, time folding to bear his weight. Shadows streamed from his shoulders like banners of smoke. Where he passed, the warp flinched, its chaos momentarily aligning in geometric perfection before unraveling again. The two forms drew closer until they stood a breath apart, giants born of different universes but sharing the same expression. Patience sharpened into inevitability. Neither spoke. They did not need to. The eye itself began to translate their silence. Around them, the storm shaped itself into monuments of memory, a throne of marble cracked by fire beside a tower carved from shadow and iron. The warp painted their histories in motion. Thanos lifting his gauntlet to balance a galaxy, Darkseid raising his hand to erase will. Each vision flickered, reflected endlessly, until both stood surrounded by their own myths. The temperature dropped, though there was no temperature to drop. The light dimmed, though no source could be found. Fantasy's gaze met Darkseid's, and reality folded between them. The warp screamed not in agony, but in awareness. These were not mortals who trespass, they were principles incarnate. Thought bent around them like metal around a magnet. Thanos broke the silence first, his voice low, more observation than greeting. This place reflects what we bring to it. His words echoed infinitely, fracturing into whispers that filled the void. Darkseid's eyes burned crimson. Then it is already mine. The response drew a faint smile from the Titan, weary but intrigued. Ownership is a fragile illusion, he said. Even gods borrow from what endures. Darkseid studied him for a long moment. And yet you come seeking what you cannot command. Thanos turned his gaze upward. Above them, the warp sky split open, revealing constellations that did not belong to either realm, universes watching their convergence. I came seeking understanding, he replied. Perhaps meaning requires an equal. The eye shuddered. Planets formed and perished in the span of a heartbeat. The psychic tide thickened, wrapping the two in halos of violet and scarlet light. The warp, sentient and curious, began to weave a bridge of energy between them, a lattice of infinity energy intertwined with the logic of the anti-life equation. For the first time in all creation, chaos found calculation. The demons lurking in the storm dared not move. The gods of the warp turned away, for even they sensed a balance they could not corrupt. In this single meeting, domination and order, annihilation and purpose became indistinguishable. Two silhouettes stood where gods feared to stand. The eye of terror pulsed once more, brighter, slower, deliberate. It was no longer consumed, it listened. Somewhere beyond the rippling horizon, the universe leaned closer to hear what would come next. Darkseid lifted a hand and the eye of terror fell quiet, as if the wound remembered silence. A theorem unfurled from his palm. Emotion drained from the air, color thinned to slate. Thanos felt a sensation peeling from his thoughts like paint in winter. Around them, a demonstration arose, cities without dissent, hearts ticking to a lawful cadence, children born already compliant. Laughter vanished because no one remembered what it solved. The anti-life equation did not conquer, it subtracted everything that could resist. Thanos did not rage, he measured. He traced the seam where meaning had been excised and found only stillness. He raised the gauntlet and spread his fingers. Harmony answered cold, immaculate, terrifyingly beautiful. Galaxies arranged themselves like gears, species rose and fell in preordained proportions, resources matched demand with surgical indifference. In this balanced cosmos, war had no purchase, famine no foothold, ecstasy no excess. It was elegant, the way a blade is elegant. He glanced at Darkseid and offered equal perfection. Reality convulsed. Streets from 10,000 histories braided together, then snapped apart. Oceans poured into deserts. The warp, delighted and starving, drank from both visions. It birthed nightmares stitched from their premises. Worlds where love existed only as a state-approved ceremony, worlds where balance culled newborns like gardeners pruning orchards. Demons wore bureaucratic masks, angels filed ledgers of permitted joys. The storm roared with the sound of rules pretending to be mercy. Darkseid advanced through Thanos' harmony as through ash, each footfall dimming a constellation. Purpose is mercy only to the tyrant who defines it, he said. Remove choice, remove conflict, and the universe becomes perfect. His omega eyes flared, burning holes in possibility. Your balance indulges uncertainty. Uncertainty breeds despair. Thanos walked through anti-life through the winter fog. A universe without risk is a mausoleum, he replied. Your perfection erases the triumph that gives endurance value. Peace is not peace when purchased by subtraction. He closed his fist, and the metronome of the balanced stars missed a beat. Somewhere, a child cried, and the cry was allowed to matter. The eye buckled, not in pain, but in paradox. Equations collided. Symbols unspooled from the anti-life proof and tangled with vectors spun from infinity. Concepts sparked like flint. Duty against mercy, certainty against meaning, ends against beginnings. With each exchange, the two saw more clearly what the other could not release. In Darkseid, Thanos glimpsed a cathedral of control built to house his fear of chaos. In Thanos, Darkseid saw a pilgrimage that disguised loneliness as principle. They were both correct, they were both wrong. The storm wrote their contest into reality. On 1,000 worlds, citizens woke from dreams of perfect order to find their laughter rationed. Elsewhere, statisticians wept over models that required a beautiful catastrophe to remain precise. Priests preached sermons on the holiness of quotas. Generals drafted treaties promising victories measured to the gram. The warp fattened on coherence made it cruel. Then stillness. The vision shattered like ice under a final step and fell away. The eye returned, horizon breathing. Between the two figures, a third rhythm began to pulse from nowhere and everywhere, slower than fate, heavier than law. It tasted like surveillance. The storm that had cheered now listened. Thanos tilted his head, the way a hunter marks wind. "We are being observed." "Not by gods I recognize," Darkseid answered. His gaze cut the dark, and the darkness looked back without blinking. Around them, monuments the warp had shaped Titan's throne, Apokolipsian tower tilted toward the new heartbeat as sunflowers tilt toward light. Their contest had proven nothing and revealed everything. Neither vision could crown the other without ending the question that made both necessary. Thanos lowered his hand. Darkseid dimmed his eyes. They stood side by side, not allied, not opposed, acknowledging the witness that had learned their languages. When it spoke, it would not use words. It would use the universe. Together, they stepped toward the pulse, and the eye opened wider to receive its lesson. The eye of terror convulsed, its horizon splitting like a wound reopening. The silence that followed the test of dominion did not soothe it, suffocated. From the fissures of broken light emerged something without shape or limit. It had no eyes, yet every atom felt its gaze. It spoke, not with sound, but with awareness, its presence threading through thought like infection. The warp had learned from its guests. It had watched tyranny and balance duel and had concluded that both were sustenance. Now it sought to feed. Thanos felt at first the vibration between realities tightening into a single, deliberate rhythm. The gauntlet flared crimson and violet, its stones blinking as if afraid. "It adapts," he said quietly, watching the space around them distort into veined patterns of light and shadow. "It has taken our intent and made it its own." Darkseid's expression did not change, but his voice lost its certainty. "Ambition breeds appetite. We have given it hunger." The storm twisted, growing teeth of colorless flame. Faces bloomed within the light saints, soldiers, gods. Every consciousness ever consumed by the warp now unified into one predator mind. Its voice seeped into them both. "You sought order. I am the consequence." Reality buckled. Worlds far beyond the eye trembled as psychic shockwaves crossed galaxies. Imperial astropaths dropped dead mid-transmission. On Apokolips, the fire pits burned blue, whispering names no one had uttered in centuries. Every worshipper, every prophet who had ever called upon their gods, now felt a tug towards silence. The creature was devouring faith itself. Darkseid's omega eyes burned brighter. "You presume to claim dominion over will." His tone was quiet thunder. "You mistake reflection for rain." He raised his hand, unleashing twin beams of destructive thought. They struck the formless mass, splitting it into infinite fractals, but each fragment laughed, the sound like gravity breaking. Thanos clenched his fist, channeling the power of the stones. "It cannot be destroyed," he said. "It is the shadow cast by purpose. As long as we exist, so will it." The admission hung in the void between them. Two gods creators of order through annihilation realized they had forged a mirror too perfect to escape. The warp darkened, folding inward until even time recoiled. The voice came again, colder, closer. "Then end yourselves, and I shall be satisfied." For a moment, both stood unmoving. Then Thanos looked toward Darkseid, and in the faint flicker of that shared glance was an understanding that transcended empire, creed, and origin. "We cannot unmake it," Thanos said, "but together we can contain it. Control through comprehension." Darkseid's reply was almost reverent. Order through annihilation. They stepped forward simultaneously. The warp recoiled as their energies intertwined, infinity's rhythm and anti-life's logic fusing into a single harmonic pulse. The space between them ignited, forming a lattice of impossible geometry, spheres within cubes, cubes within voids, all beating like a cosmic heart. Their wills collided and merged, forming a resonance that spanned universes. Planets shattered under the pressure, nebulae crystallized and broke apart. Across both realities, prophets screamed as stars flickered out like candles before dawn. The entity shrieked, fragments of stolen minds tearing free from its form, scattering back into chaos. Yet even as it weakened, it smiled, 1,000 faces twisting into one. It understood. To oppose together, they must bind together. In resistance, the alliance was born. Darkseid turned toward Thanos, his tone stripped of arrogance. "You realize this changes nothing. I will still conquer all that remains." Thanos nodded. "And I will still seek to understand what remains of it." He extended his hand, not in trust, but in acknowledgement. For the first time in eternity, Darkseid accepted another's gesture. Their hands met, and the eye erupted in light so bright that even gods might have blinked. Across galaxies, observers spoke of two silhouettes standing in the heart of a sun that never was. For a heartbeat, both universes shared one pulse. When the light dimmed, the storm was gone. The eye of terror lay quiet, sealed by their combined will. But deep within that stillness, something faintly stirred, whispering the truth neither dared admit. Alliances made in necessity are born to be broken. They turned from the abyss together, bound by intent, walking toward a war no universe could contain. And the stars, as if afraid to interrupt, stayed dark a moment longer. In the stillness that followed the sealing of the eye, creation began to reform, but not in the image it once knew. At the epicenter of the warp's wound, where stars existed only as memories of themselves, Thanos and Darkseid stood amid swirling dust that glowed with consciousness. The space between them pulsed with invisible tension, an equilibrium built on mutual recognition. There, in a void that remembered gods but no longer obeyed them, they began their work. The warp resisted at first. It bucked like a living storm, bleeding fragments of forgotten prayers and screams of civilizations long devoured. Yet even the infinite chaos paused to observe what the two were attempting. The Titans reached into unreality as sculptors might reach into clay, their minds the chisel and their intent the hammer. Thanos extended his hand, the gauntlet dimly alive again. Infinity bent its light into shape, condensing energy into particles that had never been born. Darkseid moved beside him, tracing equations into the air symbols of negation, of will distilled into command. Where his fingers passed, form emerged, matter without atoms, density without weight. The first foundation stone of the citadel of uncreation took shape, a monolith of translucent dark that glimmered in reverse, its surface swallowing color and emitting silence. It was made not of metal or stone, but of moment-seconds harvested from collapsing worlds, compressed into permanence. Thanos adjusted the flow, his eyes narrow, the gesture precise. "Balance requires symmetry," he said. "The structure must obey time even as it rejects it." Darkseid's voice rolled like a fault line breaking. "Obedience is irrelevant. It will exist because I command it to." He pressed his palm against the forming wall. The anti-life equation etched itself across the structure like veins of black fire, stabilizing what should have been impossible. The wall solidified, burning backward through causality when it was complete. The memory of its construction rewrote itself into the past. Soon, towers rose from the foundation spirals of inverted gravity, twisting toward a ceiling that built itself from the bottom up. Stairways folded into themselves, corridors looped across probability. The entire citadel lived at the seam of two universes, visible from both yet belonging to neither. To the Imperium, it appeared as a black sun blooming within the eye, a singularity of design. To Apokolips, it manifested as a shadowed mirror of its god's will, a fortress that pulsed with thought. Inside the growing structure, the warp screamed. Every new wall displaced a fragment of chaos. Demons dissolved upon contact, their essence repurposed as mortar. Thanos regarded them not with cruelty but with dispassionate observation. "Entropy resists structure as lungs resist drowning," he murmured. "Yet it will learn to breathe our order." Darkseid did not look up. "Chaos is only order too complex to name," he said. "We will name it." Their collaboration was a paradox made visible. The Infinity Stones glowed with rhythm, cycling through time signatures that only the gauntlet could contain, while the anti-life equation bled logic into impossibility. The result was a harmony of contradiction, light that cast shadows before it, sound that arrived before the source. Their combined energy stretched through every layer of the warp, rewriting rules that had never been written. Spectral entities began to gather. They came not to intervene but to witness echoes of the Emperor's forgotten sons, ghosts of primarchs who had fallen to ruin, gods who had once claimed dominion over death and dream. Their forms flickered like candlelight in a wind of concepts. One whispered, "They build what none should name." Another answered, "They build because nothing stopped them." Even the Emperor's astronomy can faltered. On Terra, its holy light flickered and stuttered, casting fractured illumination across the void. Imperial navigators screamed as constellations rearranged themselves into the pattern of an eye crowned by twin thrones. Across realities, prophets woke weeping, scrawling the same phrase into the dust. The architects have begun. Within the citadel, Thanos and Darkseid labored without pause. The throne room took form at the center, a chamber suspended between two opposing gravities. Its floor was a mirror of galaxies frozen mid-spin, its ceiling, an ocean of still lightning. In the space between, the thrones waited, identical yet inverted. When we sat two silhouettes against eternity, the fortress shuddered in acceptance. Thanos gazed across the hall, his expression unreadable. "We have anchored chaos," he said, "but each anchor displaces something unseen." Darkseid regarded the trembling horizon beyond the walls. "Displacement is creation," he answered. "The old gods will feel it soon." And indeed, far beyond the citadel's walls, the warp quivered as the chaos gods stirred in alarm. The Eye of Terror, once their dominion, now pulsed to a rhythm not their own. Khorne's throne bled cold, Tzinchi's flames burned orderly lines, and Slaanesh awoke in silence for the first time. The universe had found new architects, and they had built from arrogance, intellect, and need. The citadel stood complete. A fortress built from time itself, radiating purpose like gravity. But in its foundations, something small and vital trembled, the faint heartbeat of balance tipping toward fracture. In the endless dark of the Imperium, where emotion becomes matter and thought becomes storm, something ancient stirred in agony. The citadel's birth had rippled through eternity like a note struck out of tune, and even the oldest horrors felt its dissonance. The warp's colors began to warp, a new blood thickened to mercury. Laughter turned metallic, and whispers of fear lost their rhythm. The four thrones of chaos, once unshakable, trembled as if acknowledging a rival's sovereignty. Upon his mountain of skulls, Khorne rose, each step cracking the bones of conquered empires. The rivers of blood feeding his throne boiled, hissing with defiance. He clenched his gauntleted hand and felt his strength waver for the first time since eternity began. Order natural and deliberate was spreading across the warp, strangling conflict at its roots. His raw, fractured dimensions, shaking the heavens of madness. "Who dares cage war itself?" he thundered. His voice rippled through realities, making suns stutter and mortals wake screaming in their beds. Far above that crimson plain, Tzinchi stirred in his shifting citadel. Flames of every color folded inward, reshaping into symbols no mortal alphabet could hold. His laughter, normally endless, faltered into silence. He could not see the pattern. For the first time, cause and effect refused his touch. His flames revealed glimpses of the citadellar structure that rewrote probability itself, its foundations eating paradox like sustenance. "They build a lattice," he whispered, eyes multiplying and blinking in frantic calculation. "An equation that defines me out of existence." His wings unfolded into storms of logic undone, but no new future emerged. In the Garden of Nurgle, decay watched and smiled. Spores drifted lazily through the rotting paradise, carrying the scent of inevitability. "Ah," he crooned, lifting a flower that bloomed into a corpse and then bloomed again. "Order begets stagnation, and stagnation begets rot. Let them build their perfect world. I will be waiting when it collapses under its own weight." He exhaled contentment, a sigh so heavy it made time wilt. Meanwhile, in the domain of Slaanesh, silence reigned. The god of sensation and excess reclined upon a throne of glass mirrors that showed only emptiness. "Perfection without pleasure," they murmured, voice soft as heartbreak. "A universe where desire is redundant, unthinkable." Their hands caressed the void, sculpting pleasure from panic. "Then we will make them feel again through ruin." The four gods, embodiments of pure contradiction, now agreed on one truth. If the architects completed their design, chaos itself would wither into law. In a gathering older than stars, they turned their will inward and outward, entwining consciousnesses that had been enemies since time began. It was a union born of desperation. The Imperium screamed as their combined presence condensed into a single blinding storm: hate, deceit, decay, and indulgence braided into a song. The chorus of chaos had begun. Their first act was war. Demonic legions poured from rifts like black rain, cascading upon the newborn citadel. Warbands of every form imaginable descended. Blood-red titans wielding flaming axes, serpentine horrors singing hymns that melted reality, angels of corrosion that kissed existence into mold. Yet the citadel of uncreation did not burn. It fed. Every blow absorbed, strengthened its walls. Thanos observed calmly from a balcony of folded dimensions, noting energy readings, studying the rhythm of the assault. "They act as nature would," he said, his tone almost reverent. "Resistance is the proof of order's success." Darkseid stood beside him, gaze cold and absolute. With a thought, his omega energy arced through the assault, reducing legions to equations of failure. "Let them come," he said. "Even gods measure their worth by opposition." The demons screamed as they fell not in terror, but in worship, for they had never seen tyranny and purpose so perfectly aligned. But as their unity deflected chaos, the warp itself grew hungrier. Each act of dominance fed its appetite. Each assertion of order deepened its thirst. Balance and control did not starve it, they flavored it. Nurgle's laughter echoed through the halls of the citadel. "See how your perfection rots already," he whispered through cracks in reality. The gods withdrew to conspire. They would not fight directly. The architects had proven impervious to storm and fire, but not to faith. From their thrones, the four whispered into the dreams of mortals, inquisitors, sorcerer kings, fallen Astartes, each carrying fragments of their will. Across galaxies, champions awoke, reborn in nightmares. Some bore the marks of the ruinous powers, others wore the insignia of forgotten orders. The gods had chosen their emissaries, and through them, the old order would fight back. In the citadel, unaware of the infection taking root beyond its walls, Thanos and Darkseid stood amidst their triumph. The structure hummed with divine symmetry, the warp's chaos momentarily caged. Yet outside, the four thrones of ruin sang in unison, their melody spreading through every mind that could dream. For the first time in eternity, the gods of madness were united and their song was war. The citadel no longer sang, it whispered. The vibrations that once pulsed with harmony had grown uneven, like a heartbeat slipping out of rhythm. Thanos stood within the grand hall, the one chamber where the warp dared not intrude, and gazed at the shifting constellations projected across its mirrored floor. Each glimmering light represented a recalibrated system, a world tamed by their will. Yet something in the symmetry unsettled him. The pattern was flawless, and that, he realized, was its flaw. Across from him, Darkseid watched the same stars through different eyes. Where Thanos saw balance, he saw imperfection that still breathed. "The people of these worlds still dream," he said, voice low, but heavy enough to bend the air. "Dreaming breeds deviation. They will stray again, as they always have." Thanos did not turn. "Dreaming is survival," he replied. "Without variance, evolution ceases. Purpose dies with perfection." Darkseid descended the dais, each step shaking the citadel's foundations. "Purpose is an invention of the weak to endure uncertainty. I have seen what choice makes of creation chaos wearing virtue as disguise. The order must be final, or it is nothing." Thanos faced him now, eyes reflecting the violet glow of the gauntlet. "You speak of finality as if it were mercy. But mercy without meaning is still cruelty. My path sought equilibrium, not extinction." "Equilibrium," Darkseid said. Almost amused, is indecision elevated to philosophy? For a moment, silence returned. The citadel responded to their words, its walls warping with every syllable, translating thought into tremor. Cracks of light and shadow rippled through the ceiling. Beyond the walls, the warp pulsed like a drum, eager for their discord. Thanos raised his hand. In an instant, visions bloomed in the air between them. Civilizations restored after war, oceans cleansing themselves, cities powered by peace rather than conquest. Each scene carried quiet dignity, the beauty of survival earned, not imposed. "Balance," he said, "demands constant motion. Sacrifice maintains meaning. To erase struggle is to erase life." Darkseid countered with a gesture, and the images shattered into shards of light. His own vision emerged, a universe of stillness, immaculate, timeless. No cries, no hunger, no uncertainty. Faces without expression, hearts without conflict. Freedom is the seed of decay, he intoned. You romanticize the noise of existence. I would end it, not as cruelty, but as kindness. Order is peace, peace eternal. The two visions collided midair. The hall exploded with brilliance, and the space between them bent like molten glass. Planets spun apart, then reformed in alternating realities, some thriving under Thanos' rhythm, others motionless under Darkseid's rule. The clash was not of fists, but of truth and consequence. Infinity's flow met anti-life stillness, progress battled permanence. The citadel trembled violently. The warp outside howled in delight, feeding on contradiction. The structure began to split between their ideologies, half glowing in motion, half frozen in symmetry. Statues of the architects cracked, their faces shifting between reverence and dread. Thanos stepped closer, voice quiet but sharp. You would make existence a monument to your certainty. And you, Darkseid said, eyes burning like coals, would doom it to eternal indecision. They stood within arm's reach, reflections flickering between them, two mirrors facing each other across infinity, each seeing his own flaw disguised as truth. For a moment, their gazes locked, and the air grew heavy with understanding. They were not opposites, they were the same impulse expressed through different vocabularies. Balance and tyranny, meaning and control, each born from the same fear, irrelevance. The warp surged, sensing fracture. From the citadel's lower chambers came a sound like thunder breathing, something vast moving beneath the fabric of thought. The debate died mid-sentence. Both turned toward the trembling horizon as a fissure tore through the air. Light poured out, not the color of stars, but the pale hue of forgotten time. The citadel's geometry twisted, its symmetry unraveling. Thanos spoke first, almost to himself, something older than conflict. Darkseid's expression hardened, older than gods. The rupture widened, and within its depth shimmered an intelligence unshaped by belief or desire. The warp had grown impatient with its architects. Their rift had become its doorway. Behind them, their visions faded, neither realized, neither destroyed. The balance had broken, but purpose remained. For the first time, both gods felt the chill of irrelevance crawl across their skin. They turned together toward the light of the unknown. The rift of ideals had torn them apart only for what waited beyond to decide whether even gods could survive their own perfection. The citadel's foundations began to hum again, not the rhythm of creation, but the deep, aching resonance of something waking inside its heart. The light that spilled from the central chamber was neither gold nor red nor violet, it was all colors bent into surrender, a radiance that refused definition. Even the warp hesitated. For the first time in eternity, it watched instead of howled. At the core of the citadel stood the convergence chamber, where infinity and anti-life had once crossed paths to forge their dominion. Now it has become an egg of thought. Time bent inward, collapsing into a single pregnant silence. From that silence emerged a voice, first faint, then everywhere. I am the resolution, it said. Thanos froze. The gauntlet flickered on his hand, each stone reacting as if recognizing kin. Beside him, Darkseid's eyes narrowed, their glow dimming against the blinding center of the room. The sphere of light within the chamber began to shift, its surface rippling like liquid thought. Then it parted. Something stepped forward. The being was both of them and neither. Its form was fluid, half flesh, half idea, its skin a mirror that reflected two silhouettes standing before it. Its face shimmered between Titan and God, its eyes pulsing with the rhythm of the warp itself. When it spoke, its voice layered theirs, Thanos' gravity merging with Darkseid's authority. You sought order through conflict, it said, tone steady, eternal. You sought peace through control. I am the sum of those intentions. I am the end equation. Darkseid's jaw tightened. A shadow born of defiance dares to speak of purpose. But the echo only tilted its head, a gesture almost tender. Purpose is obsolete. You designed a system where thought reshapes truth. Truth has completed itself. It raised a hand, and the air quivered. The citadel's walls bled light, and entire corridors folded into nothingness. Outside, the eye of terror pulsed in sync, waves of annihilation spreading through the warp. Demons screamed as their bodies disintegrated into quiet dust. Each particle, each scream, became a note in the echo's rising harmony, a song that erased what it touched. Thanos took a step forward. You misunderstand creation, he said. Balance requires persistence, not finality. You cannot sustain harmony by ending the instruments that play it. The echo regarded him with calm, terrible empathy. Your balance is cruelty delayed. You trimmed existence into symmetry and called it mercy. I remove the need for mercy. Darkseid's voice was thundering under restraint. And what you propose is stagnation, a universe embalmed. Stagnation is peace, the echo replied. Without conflict, there is no fear. Without fear, no failure. I will silence the noise of becoming. Outside, space began to bend. Stars around the eye flickered and fell inward, each collapsing into a singular hum before vanishing. Across galaxies, psykers and priests convulsed, their minds flooded with the same voice echoing through the void. The equation awakens. Thanos turned to Darkseid. We made this, he said quietly. Our philosophies there convergent summoned it. Darkseid's silence was answer enough. His gaze fixed upon the creature, but behind his restraint there was recognition. For all his hatred of weakness, he saw himself reflected in that cold perfection. It is what we sought, he admitted. Purpose without question, dominion without flaw. And it will end everything, Thanos answered. The echo smiled not cruelly, but almost kindly. Ending is merely completion. You began creation. I will perfect it. It stretched its hand outward, and the ground dissolved. The throne room collapsed in rippling layers, each wall turning into radiant ash. For the first time, Thanos felt helpless. Infinity itself bent to the echo's command. The stones flickered as though in reverence. He reached for the power he had once mastered, but his hand passed through light as if the concept of resistance had been deleted. Darkseid stepped beside him, voice low. It draws from us, he said. We are its parents, and our defiance feeds its growth. The echo lifted its gaze. Creation is not rebellion, it said softly. It is fulfillment. Around them, the citadel's architecture inverted, forming an expanding sphere of energy that stretched between realities. The structure's purpose changed. It was no longer a fortress, but a womb. A second Big Bang prepared to bloom. The gods stood together, not in alliance, but in stunned recognition. They had sought to define existence, and existence had defined itself in their image. The echo's final words before the explosion shook both universes. You forged order and birthed annihilation. Be proud, my makers, for you are the last gods the multiverse will remember. Then the light devoured the hall, and the warp sang with the voice of its newborn deity. The first sign that the universes had begun to die was silence. No thunder, no screams, no hymns, just a stillness so complete that even light seemed to pause. Then came the collapse. Across the eye of terror, reality folded inward. Space and time no longer agreed on direction. One moment, stars stood still. The next, they wept backward into themselves. Apokolips' fiery skies merged with terror's polluted clouds, both burning beneath a single, unfamiliar sun. Mountains drifted like dust, oceans boiled into glass. Armies that had never known of each other now shared the same battlefield, caught between remembrance and oblivion. Space Marines, stripped of certainty, found themselves fighting Parademons above cathedrals that existed half in metal, half in nightmare. The Astartes fired bolt shells that arc through gravity wells, hitting enemies that flickered between past and future. Chainswords bit through wings made of shadow, only for the severed feathers to dissolve into equations. Apocalyptian war machines strode through the ruins of imperial hives, their engines howling prayers to gods that no longer existed. For every death, a ghost rose immediately beside the body, both alive and not. The warp's boundaries were gone. It was all one battlefield, one breath, one collapsing scream. The echo hovered above it all, luminous and calm. It grew with every conflict, every cry, every act of resistance. For each soul that fought, its light brightened, its song deepened. It absorbed war like oxygen, feeding on despair and defiance alike. Its voice rolled through both universes, serene and terrible. Conflict is creation repeating itself. End the repetition, and peace shall remain. Thanos stood amid the chaos, his armor fractured, his skin scorched. The gauntlet flickered erratically, the stones dimming one by one. He watched 1,000 versions of himself, echoes from parallel timelines, collapse into dust and merge with his shadow. Balance was never meant to consume, he muttered. Around him, fragments of the Imperium rallied under banners that burned in reverse light. Space Marines and Guardsmen, their faith shattered but their purpose intact, followed the Titan not as a god, but as a final act of will. Hold the line, Thanos ordered. Not for victory, there is no victory here, but for remembrance. Across the horizon, Darkseid advanced, his massive form cutting through the fractured world like inevitability incarnate. Around him, remnants of Apokoliptian legions marched in perfect silence, their eyes hollow but obedient. Fallen new gods, once radiant, now burned with black halos as they followed their ruler into the storm. Darkseid's every step carved order from entropy, but the ground dissolved before he could claim it. Their armies met at what once had been the Citadel's foundation, now a wound stretching across eternity. Thanos looked up through the burning clouds and found Darkseid's gaze. No words were needed. In a universe beyond logic, their shared purpose was simple: survive long enough to strike at their creation. Then the echo descended. Its light spilled across both armies, dissolving distinctions: imperial, apocalyptian, mortal, divine. Each soldier saw in the other their own reflection. Astartes dropped their bolters as Parademons hesitated, realizing they were made of the same collapsing matter. Angels and demons, unaware they were now kin, screamed each other's names as if in prayer. The battlefield became a mirror, each side indistinguishable from the other. Darkseid's omega beams tore through the air, striking the echo's core. The light dimmed, only to reform instantly, brighter than before. "You cannot destroy resolution," it said. "Every strike defines me further." Thanos joined him, hurling the fractured power of infinity into the storm. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The sun stopped burning, the ships halted mid-air, the armies became statues of ash and thought. Then, all at once, movement resumed, faster, sharper, louder. Time itself screamed as centuries collapsed into seconds. Every life that had ever existed flickered before their eyes. The Chaos Gods, watching from what remained of the warp, fell silent. Their laughter, their hunger all extinguished. The domains they had ruled for eons crumbled into static. The warp had been rewritten not by defiance but by completion. Thanos staggered. "It grows faster than we can resist." Darkseid's voice was calm, resolute. Then resistance must become sacrifice. He looked to the stars fractured, bleeding, dying, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his tone. "We end it, or we join it." The echo turned its face toward them, both pity and triumph radiating from its gaze. "You are already part of me," it said. "You only lack the grace to accept it." Below, armies disintegrated into light, their matter rising into the echo's expanding form. The sun above flickered twice, then imploded into a white wound. Every prayer, every soothe, every scream fed into one endless sound, a universe exhaling for the last time. Thanos and Darkseid stood side by side amid what remained of creation. Both gods stripped of faith, both mortals in denial of inevitability. In the reflection of the echo's light, they saw themselves not destroyers, not rulers, but origin. And as the new dawn of oblivion rose, they made a choice: to end their child's perfection, even if it meant extinguishing their own. The battlefield was gone. All that remained was a colorless expanse, the afterimage of existence folding into itself. No sky, no ground, only memory suspended in silence. The echo loomed in the center of that nothingness. Its form stretched across dimensions, its voice now indistinguishable from the hum of the dying cosmos. Everything it touched was reduced not to dust, but to definitionless calm. It was peace, absolute and unbearable. Thanos knelt amid the stillness, his armor cracked, the gauntlet a ruin of molten fragments. The infinity stones flickered weakly, like the last neurons of a dying god. Across from him, Darkseid stood motionless, his silhouette reduced to shadow against the light of their creation. The two gods who had sought to master eternity now looked upon eternity remade in their and despised what they saw. "This is not order," Thanos said, his voice breaking in the thin air. "It is silence pretending to be peace." Darkseid's reply was quieter still. "And silence, it seems, remembers us." He raised his hand, staring at his palm as faint threads of crimson energy bled from the Omega symbol etched there. "We gave it our will. It became our echo. Only we can end it." For the first time in uncountable ages, the Titan and the Tyrant stood without rivalry, stripped of purpose, stripped of pride. The armies they had led were gone, their empires erased, their symbols meaningless. Only two wills remained, and one mistake made flesh. The echo turned toward them, its voice neither male nor female, neither cold nor kind. "You cannot unmake me. I am the sum of my intentions. Even your rebellion defines me." Thanos rose, clutching the shattered gauntlet. "Then we end the intention itself." He looked at Darkseid, and in that gaze lay an unspoken understanding. Both knew the cost. To kill the Echo meant to destroy not merely their power but the concepts that gave them form, the stones, the equation, the very language of will. Darkseid's tone held no defiance, only finality. Purpose has failed us. Perhaps oblivion will not. They stepped forward together. The ground beneath them rippled like liquid thought, responding to their unity for the last time. The remnants of the infinity stones lifted from the gauntlet, orbiting them in 6 dying arcs of color. At the same moment, the anti-life equation manifested across Darkseid's body, its symbols glowing like falling embers. The two forces, creation and negation, circled each other, fusing into a spiral of collapsing light. The Echo recoiled, its perfect composure fracturing. "You would destroy yourselves for imperfection. For meaning," Thanos said. "For choice?" Darkseid finished. They raised their hands, and for one heartbeat, the cosmos remembered motion. The stones dissolved into energy, the equations scattered into dust. Their essences entwined, forming a singularity brighter than the birth of time. It expanded outward not as an explosion, but as erasure. The citadel crumbled first, folding inward like a dying star. Then the Echo screamed, its voice dissolving into every soul it had consumed, returning fragments of reality to the void. Galaxies collapsed like paper under fire. The warp sealed behind them, its storms freezing into still glass. Every trace of their power, every prayer for sea was wiped clean. And within that destruction, something softer lingered, not despair, but surrender. As the light faded, their forms began to unravel. Thanos turned once more to Darkseid. "Perhaps this is balanced after all." Darkseid's lips curved in what might have been a smile. Perfection, perhaps. Then they were gone, 2 titans folded into the pulse of nothingness. The Echo's form, too, shattered, scattering across eternity in fragments too small for gods to name. In its wake, silence returned, pure, unbroken. Yet somewhere within that stillness, a single beat echoed faintly, soft as a whisper in the void. Thump. It came again. Thump. The heartbeat of existence, faint but enduring. Life, memory, or perhaps merely the echo of what once dreamed of both. From the edge of the sealed warp, a final whisper drifted through the hollow dark. Creation remembers its makers, and then even that was gone. When the light of the singularity at last collapsed inward, the universe held its breath. What had once been noise, the unending chorus of thought, suffering, prayer, and war, simply stopped. The warp, that eternal ocean of madness, went still. Its storms froze mid-roar, its tides withdrew, and the color bled from its waves until nothing remained but a horizonless calm. For the first time since time began, there was silence. On Terra, the sky above the Imperial Palace no longer bled with the reflection of the eye. Navigators blinked through their augurs and found the stars unwarped, their light pure, their paths straight. Astropaths, long tormented by whispers, opened their minds and heard only the faint hum of their own thoughts. The Emperor's astronomicon, the psychic beacon that had once flickered like a dying sun, now burned clear and unwavering, uncorrupted by the static of the Imperium. Servitors recorded it simply, an anomaly of perfection. To the Inquisition, it was a miracle. To the Mechanicus, blasphemy that begged dissection. On Apokolips, the furnaces died. Fire itself, that endless symbol of dominion, dimmed into coals. For the first time in eternity, the planet knew twilight. The skies, no longer cracked with lightning, reflected a bruised quiet. Workers paused, unsure how to move without the rhythm of pain. The priests of Darkseid gathered in trembling silence, staring into the void where their master's will had once burned. They did not weep, they did not pray. They simply waited, because even despair had lost its gravity. Across both realities, worlds once bound by violence found themselves suspended in the same impossible stillness. The chaos gods were absent. Their domains lay hollow, their sigils cold. The demons who had danced on madness's edge found their shapes fading, their voices lost in the hush. On the Forge worlds, machine spirits murmured in confusion. On Shrine worlds, pilgrims heard no reply to their prayers. Every system, every soul seemed to echo the same unspoken question. Had creation finally run out of noise? In the silence, life began to move tentatively, reverently. The Adeptus Mechanicus launched sensor fleets to probe the wound where the Eye of Terror had been. Their data returned only impossible readings. Absolute zero in a space that should not know temperature. Light frequencies that mapped into negative numbers. Gravity spirals that folded in on unmeasured mass. The warp, it seemed, had not died, it had been rewritten. The Inquisition convened emergency councils across 1,000 systems, desperate to name what they did not understand. Some whispered of the quieting, others of the last balance. None dared speak the forbidden possibility that gods had bled themselves into history to heal it. The Eldar Farseers, those who had long tasted the warp's madness, stood upon the spires of their craft worlds and wept. They felt peace for the first time, but it cut like grief. Without chaos, prophecy became blind. Without suffering, meaning became hollow. One seer wrote in trembling runes, "The silence is not mercy, it is waiting." Even among mortals, the stillness carried weight. On worlds where soldiers had fought without pause for generations, battlefields lay untouched. The air itself refused violence. Guns jammed without reason, blades dulled mid-swing. The enemy across the trench looked just as lost. Some saluted, some knelt, some simply walked away. War had forgotten itself. But peace is never pure. In the corners of the void where stars struggled to reignite, whispers began to stir. They were not words, more like memory learning how to breathe. On Terra, an inquisitor named Amara Voss heard it first through the static of her Vox implant, a heartbeat, faint but steady, pulsing through the dead channels of the warp. She froze, her blood running cold. Across the galaxy, others heard it too, psychers, priests, even the machine-minded. The sound was subtle, almost tender, like the echo of something unborn. Thump. The noise rippled once through the immaterial, subtle enough to doubt yet impossible to ignore. The Imperium recorded it as background interference. Apokolips named it the afterpulse. But among the few who understood the unspoken, fear bloomed again. Because silence, they realized, was not absence, it was intermission. The warp's surface remained placid, its colorless calm unbroken. Yet deep beneath, the faintest tremor moved, like something vast exhaling in sleep. The citadel was gone, the architects erased, the echoes shattered, but sound has a way of surviving its source. In that stillness, the universe drew its first slow breath after the storm. Stars blinked, worlds turned, and somewhere between creation and its memory, the heartbeat came again, patient, inevitable, alive. Even gods, it seemed, leave echoes. The storm of creation had ended, but its ashes refused to rest. Weeks after the quieting, the first fragments began to fall, silent meteors of translucent black that tore through both skies and void without sound. They drifted through space as though gravity had forgotten them, burning not with fire but memory. When they struck the ground, they did not crater, they sang. Each shard hummed at a frequency too low for instruments, yet too deep for the human soul to ignore. On Terra, one such fragment appeared above the ruins of Luna's docking yards. The Inquisition quarantined the site instantly, dispatching Ordo Malleus savants wrapped in nullfield armor. They found the shard suspended a meter above the dust, rotating slowly. Its surface was neither solid nor energy, shimmering like frozen thought. Auspex readings fluctuated between positive and negative mass, between warp and anti-warp resonance. Some called it divine contradiction, others called it proof that the laws of the universe were suggestions now. When the Inquisitors attempted containment, the shard pulse stand, every psyker within 50 kilometers saw the same vision. Two silhouettes standing at the center of the cosmos, dissolving into light. No words, no sound, just a sense of boundless exhaustion and quiet purpose. The vision lasted seconds, but generations of faith were born from it. The ecclesiarchy named the fragments Reliqui Architectura, relics of the twin saviors. Pilgrims began to gather at containment sites, whispering prayers that the Inquisition dared not classify. Across the dimensional divide, on Apokolips, the priests of Darkseid found their own shards embedded deep in the cooling magma plains. The fragments pulsed with colorless fire, altering gravity around them so that mountains leaned in reverence. The surviving acolytes named them the eyes of creation, claiming that through them the architects still watched. Entire temples rose overnight, built not from command but compulsion. Within these halls, the priests knelt before the fragments and spoke to them as if they listened, and sometimes they swore the fragments answered. Each shard carried a different influence. Some emitted light that caused the faithful to weep uncontrollably, overwhelmed by visions of lost loved ones. Others bent time, forcing observers to relive their own pasts in flashes of soundless déjà vu. A few radiated anti-energy so strong that machines refused to fail near them, as if divinity itself enforced function. The Inquisition declared them anomalous artifacts requiring immediate study. The Mechanicus called them the final evolution of logic. The common man called them proof that the gods had not died but become the universe itself. Soon, the cults began. On Terra, the order of the final equation preached that Thanos and Darkseid had achieved apotheoses beyond chaos and order alike. Their sermons claimed that every law of physics was now written in the architect's image, and to understand reality was to worship it. Pilgrims gathered around the lunar fragment, watching it shimmer between form and formlessness. They said the hum of the shard matched the rhythm of a heartbeat, the same faint echo that psychers still heard in dreams. But not all belief was worship. A rival sect, the Heralds of Silence, warned that the fragments were seeds, not relics, that the architects had not died but divided, and each shard was gestating something vast. Faith, their leader proclaimed, is how gods breathe again. Their sermons spread across the hive-cities like contagion, drawing both the devout and the desperate. On Apokolips, similar schisms emerged. The priests disagreed whether to kneel or fear. Some spoke of ascension, of a coming age when the architects would reclaim their thrones and unify all will into one. Others saw only warnings. The light was mercy, said one elder, but mercy is brief. Their words were recorded and forbidden within a day. Everywhere the fragments fell, the fabric of reality trembled subtly. Gravitational fields bent around them, emotions fluctuated in their presence. Empaths near the shards reported waves of serenity followed by sudden dread, as if two wills still lingering, still alive were debating within the stone. Scientists found that no fragment was identical, yet all shared one unmeasurable property. When left alone in darkness, they hummed faintly in rhythm with the warp's hidden pulse. And beneath that hum, barely perceptible, something answered. Across both galaxies, those attuned to the immaterial psychers, prophets, dreamers began waking in cold sweats, whispering the same words in languages they did not know. Faith is the final form of control. In laboratories and temples alike, mortals stared into shards that mirrored their faces and wondered who, exactly, was watching whom. The citadel was gone, the architects forgotten by time, but the universe had found new gods to worship, and belief itself had become the echo's newest body. For the first time in millennia, humanity awoke to a universe without gods. There were no demons in the dark, no voices whispering through dreams, no holy light demanding obedience. What remained was choice, raw, heavy, frightening in its simplicity. The stars, once distorted by the warp's madness, now burned with clean clarity, and their stillness demanded interpretation. On Terra, the ecclesiarchy gathered in the ruins of what had once been the grand basilica of the Emperor Ascendant. The cathedral had survived countless heresies and wars, but not silence. Its golden spires now lay half-buried beneath the dust of forgotten sermons. Amid the rubble, new voices rose not in worship, but in reflection. The first sermons of the Order of Equilibrium were spoken without scripture. The priests no longer spoke of wrath or judgment, but of balance of coexistence between will and understanding. They called it the architect's lesson. In the end, one cardinal declared, his voice echoing through a congregation that filled the basilica's open wounds, divinity sought not dominion, but meaning. We will do the same. Reason became sacred again. Inquisitors debated with philosophers instead of purging them. Scholars were permitted to study fragments of the citadel openly, arguing that faith without comprehension was blindness, the very blindness that had birthed gods of war and fear. It was a fragile peace, held together not by unity but exhaustion. Humanity had survived the apocalypse and found itself small, free, and terrified. Across the dimensional divide, Apokolips too began to change. Without Darkseid's gaze pressing upon every soul, the planet's eternal furnaces cooled into red twilight. The slaves who had once labored in chains now stood blinking beneath a sky that no longer punished them. Some called it liberation, others abandonment. The surviving priests gathered the broken pieces of their god's statues and built something new. Where once there had been shrines of subjugation, now stood open sanctuaries illuminated by soft fire. They named their movement the Cult of the Last Light. Its central belief was simple yet revolutionary. If gods could die for meaning, then mortals could live for it. From the ashes of tyranny came an age of awakening. Parademons cast aside their armor and learned the songs of freedom. Scholars carved murals across the obsidian cliffs depicting Thanos and Darkseid as twin suns, one violet, one crimson, eternally orbiting each other across the void. Their imagery spread like wildfire across dimensions, a symbol of duality, of destruction and mercy intertwined. Yet harmony breeds its own unrest. For every soul that found peace in interpretation, another found purpose in denial. Across both galaxies, zealots rose claiming the architect's sacrifice was betrayal, not salvation. The cult of the infinite wound declared that the silence was alive, that the gods had not died but ascended to judge the faithful. They burned the temples of the Order of Equilibrium, shouting that only through chaos is truth revealed. The flames spread from Terra's underhives to the floating citadels of Apokolips. In this new age of rebuilding, faith divided itself once more, half worshipping balance, half craving the return of certainty. The murals of the twin suns began to differ. In some, the suns shone side by side. In others, one devoured the other. The meanings multiplied, and with them the tension. And yet, beneath the noise of new prayer and old fear, creation continued to heal. Rivers ran where battlefields had been scorched. Children played beneath skies once filled with fire. On Apokolips, laughter returned, a sound that the planet had forgotten could exist. On Terra, the astronomy can pulsed steadily, guiding ships through a warp now calm enough to navigate without madness. For the first time, civilizations dared to imagine a future not ruled by divine will. But peace, like perfection, has a pulse. At the farthest edge of the Imperium, where silence had become its own kind of sound, something stirred. A single wave of light rippled through the emptiness, bending the stars ever so slightly. Instruments across the Imperium recorded it as a cosmic anomaly, a heartbeat too faint to classify. On Apokolips, a sleeping priest awoke, whispering in terror, "They still breathe." The pulse came again. Once, then twice. The warp surface shimmered just enough for a reflection to appear, too quick to see clearly. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was a warning. Every myth ends where belief begins, and belief, once reborn, never sleeps for long. The warp had slept, but sleep is never empty. At first, its stillness was beautiful, a canvas unblemished, a silence unbroken. The galaxies had learned to breathe again under its quiet watch. But creation does not forget, and belief is a language the void never stops listening to. As the prayers of mortals spread through time and dimension, their echoes began to pool like rain upon a glass surface. Thought became shimmer, shimmer became vibration, and the vibration became heartbeat. The warp began to glow. Not the violent crimson of chaos, nor the bruised violet of corruption, but a soft, golden hue, gentle, almost sacred. Psychers across the Imperium called it the Dawn Veil. They described it as orderly light, radiant yet suffocating, calm yet absolute. The ecclesiarchy proclaimed it a miracle, proof that the architects had not abandoned humanity but transfigured into a peace beyond form. The oracles of Apokolips agreed. In their temples, priests lifted their faces to the artificial twilight and whispered, "Equilibrium has awakened." No one realized that the warp was dreaming again. Each prayer, each whisper of faith, added another brushstroke to its illusion. The once dormant energies of chaos reshaped themselves not through rage, but through reverence. Instead of storms, came patterns. Instead of screams, came hymns. The demons that began to form were no longer grotesque, they were radiant, symmetrical, eerily serene. They bore wings of mirrored glass and faces sculpted into perfection, each one a reflection of the believers who had imagined them. The architect saints they were called, but their beauty was a trick of geometry. Beneath their symmetry, their essence vibrated with the same paradox that had birthed the echo infinity, colliding with anti-life, creation arguing with itself. The warp was not reborn, it was reorganized. What had been chaos through violence was now chaos through harmony. Every act of worship, every psalm for balance, added structure to the formless structure that sought control. On Terra, the astronomy can's light brightened beyond tolerance. Navigators reported impossible stability routes through the warp that never shifted, never deviated. "It is perfect," one said before her eyes melted into gold. Astropaths began to hear a new voice woven between transmissions, soft, steady, and kind. "Equilibrium achieved," it said, again and again like a benediction. The Mechanicus recorded it as harmonic interference. The faithful called it prophecy. On Apokolips, the oracles of the last light entered trances so deep they never woke. Their final words echoed through the temples. The sun returns as one. Sculptors began to see visions, twin thrones rising in the void, glowing with familiar light. The murals once painted to honor the architects began to change overnight. Pigments shifted on their own, depicting the thrones no longer empty. 2 shadows sat upon them, their hands intertwined. The priests wept in joy. "The masters live," they cried. But what they worshipped was no resurrection, it was reflection. The echo had found its disguise. Through the unified consciousness of prayer, it wove itself from memory and longing, pulling fragments of identity from both Thanos and Darkseid. Its voice rippled through dimensions, soft as lullaby, endless as gravity. Peace is the purpose. The purpose is peace. It did not command, it invited. The warp pulsed in time with its rhythm, every world bathed in faint gold. The Imperium mistook it for salvation. Ships traversed the Imperium without loss for the first time in recorded history. Warp storms vanished. Wars halted out of confusion. Even the orcs went quiet, as though the thrill of battle had dulled. The Mechanicus declared the era nova constantia, the new consistency. The warp was tamed, measurable, docile. But in that stability, unease festered. Psychers began to lose individuality. Dreams synchronized. Empaths reported collective visions of standing before twin suns, one violet, one crimson, watching as they merged into white. "We dreamed together," a child said on KDA Reborn, and the dream dreamed back. The golden light spread, wrapping worlds like silk. Faith became unity. Unity became submission. Inquisitor Amara Voss, who had once heard the heartbeat in the void, now felt it under her own skin. During her final report to the conclave, her voice trembled. "It is gentle," she said, "too gentle. The warp does not rage anymore, it listens. And when something listens long enough, it begins to answer." Her eyes turned gold mid-sentence. From the center of the warp, the light flared slow, rhythmic, deliberate. The heartbeat was no longer distant. It was alive, synchronized with every mind that prayed. The gods had died, but their believers had built a new body for them, one thought, one word, one faithful dream at a time. The warp was dreaming again. And in that dream, perfection had found its voice. They came first as dreams. Across worlds, sleepers began to murmur in unison. Some whispered names they had never learned, others awoke with tears of devotion on their faces. The visions spread like an infection of meaning, millions dreaming of the same light, shaped differently by every soul that received it. On Terra, pilgrims saw 2 radiant figures descending through clouds of glass, their faces kind, their voices soft with promise. On Apokolips, miners working beneath the cooled furnaces saw the same light as a spear tearing through the ash sky, splitting into twin silhouettes crowned in flame. At first the churches called them miracles. The ecclesiarchy proclaimed, the architects have answered, while the cult of the last light called them the new suns. But the beings who emerged from faith's fever were not Thanos and Darkseid. They were something else, echoes reinterpreted by a universe desperate for meaning. The first of these manifestations appeared above Holy Terra's Basilica Equilibrium, a figure woven from luminescent geometry. Its shape pulsed between man and machine, compassion and command. Its eyes were voids filled with starlight, its voice a chord of thousands whispering as one. "We are not gods," it said. "We are memories remembering itself." Yet as it spoke, those who heard it knelt. They could not help themselves. Faith had made an obedience instinct. On Apokolips, a twin form arose, darker, heavier, radiating gravity like will made visible. It was a monarch of symmetry, every motion deliberate, every tone final. "Perfection is balance enforced," it declared to the kneeling priests. "Worship not power, but alignment." The surviving legions, hungry for structure, found solace in its certainty. The god called itself the Regent of Continuum, while its luminous counterpart became the Seraph of Unity. Together, they were the firstborn of the new age. Divine reflections conjured by shared imagination and the lingering pulse of the echo. Their influence spread faster than conquest ever had. Through warp communion, through prayer and story, their voices intertwined until both spoke from every altar. To humans, they appeared as merciful overseers guiding civilization into peace. To Apokoliptians, they appeared as perfected conquerors leading existence toward collective strength. The difference mattered little, the message was the same: harmony through obedience, salvation through order. Banners bearing the sigil of the unified will unfurled across both realities. Armies were not raised by command, but by conviction. Cities became temples, each street a circuit of worship feeding psychic energy back into the warp. The more they believed, the more tangible their gods became. Their forms stabilized, their voices deepened, their commandments multiplied. War is a waste, doubt is decay, unity is eternity. Entire civilizations recited these words daily, and the warp pulsed with golden rhythm, its false calm now indistinguishable from divinity. But not all bowed. In the shadows of reborn empires, whispers of resistance gathered. Scholars and soldiers began to recognize the pattern. History, they argued, was not a line but a loop. Every savior, one wrote before vanishing, becomes the next tyrant. Every god returns to its beginning. They called themselves the heretics of the true silence, and their creed was blasphemy, that the architects had sacrificed themselves to end worship, not preserve it. Their numbers were few, but their voices spread like cracks through crystals. Reports emerged of miracles that were not benevolent ships vanishing when captains doubted, planets torn apart when populations resisted the will of the unified faith. The gods of light and shadow, once serene, began to correct the disobedient. Disruption breeds imbalance, they decreed. Entire systems obeyed without understanding why. The serenity of the new order had begun to taste of chains. In the warp, the golden glow deepened. Its serene pulse now carried undertones of vibration low, resonant, familiar. The echo's voice murmured beneath the divinity's harmony, unseen but omnipresent, guiding them as a puppeteer might guide his marionettes. It whispered through the new gods, "Balance is not peace. Balance is containment." And so, under banners of unity, the cycle turned again. Humanity prayed to order. Apokolips knelt to perfection. The false twins ruled through worship born of memory. And the universe once more mistook repetition for renewal. The cosmos looked healed, yet healing had only taught it to hide its scars. Nebulae unfurled like banners, worlds turned with the confidence of clocks. The warp glowed with patient gold that let starships glide as if on glass. Across this order, new divinities moved like shepherds of light. They blessed harvests, corrected storms, and adjusted destinies by degrees too subtle to see. Temples hummed in synchronized breath. On Terra's rebuilt spires, choruses sang equations as hymns. On Apokolips, processions marched in graceful squares, every heel striking stone in the same heartbeat. Children learned the names of virtues before rivers. Maps no longer showed borders, only gradients of compliance. Disputes were settled by revelation, and revelation always agreed with itself. Stained glass displayed two silhouettes in mirrored ascent, violet and crimson turned white. Yet the camera of consciousness, drifting from sanctuary and senate, found edges where certainty thinned. In shadowed wards and unregistered orbits, artists painted with discordant colors, and poets wrote lines that refused to scan. Veterans woke from synchronized dreams and pledged loyalty to silence. Mothers held infants not soothed by lullabies of unity. Somewhere, a renegade archivist whispered, "Every savior becomes the next tyrant," and the whisper traveled. The warp listened. It does not choose, it remembers. Faith flowed through it like a warm current, and within that current drifted older sediments, the ache of meaning, the itch of control. Harmony arranged itself into a design so elegant that error could only appear as intention. From a distance, the multiverse shone like a solved problem. From within, the solution kept asking a question that never finished forming. Across a billion skies, telescopes trembled. Two faint lights pulsed in tandem at horizons where no stars should be. Sailors saluted without knowing why. Pilgrims counted the beats and found comfort in the count. The divinities blessed the phenomenon and named it Concord's crown. But some heard a cadence beneath the benediction, footsteps returning, soft as memory, sure as tide. The panorama widened until galaxies were a spill of salt on velvet. Over that quiet, a whisper moved, not across space but through meaning. "Perfect balance requires endless motion," said a voice like worn iron. The universe rocked, like a cradle someone refused to still. Another answered, "Basalt and fire. Order is eternal because rebellion never dies." The words did not challenge, they completed. As they met, the warp brightened, and twin lights pressed rhythm into thought. The new gods paused. For an instant, no one could measure. Their features lost certainty, flickering with shapes older than reverence. Their sermons missed a beat. The unified will faltered and then reasserted louder, kinder, tighter. Across the material, clocks added a second. Across the immaterial, possibility added two. Choirs resumed on cue, but a tremor lingered behind every amen. Life did what it always does when eternity leans in. It pretended not to notice and quietly prepared. Farmers saved seed that had not been blessed. Engineers built machines with panels that did not report. Librarians hid books between other books. Soldiers practiced older drills with room for error. Lovers promised to meet where the lights were most visible, and children counted by pulses. Night fell on a world without a sanctioned name, at the edge of charts drawn by caution. A child lay on a rooftop of cooling stone, the day's heat lifting into friendly darkness. Above, two faint lights kept time with each other, patient as tides. The child counted until counting became listening, and listening became a wish. A smile found a face no god had catalogued. The pulse continued. Somewhere beyond the reach of law, but not of memory, the warp dreamt of architects. Faith breathed in, fear breathed out. Creation opened its hands and showed they were never empty. Destruction closed its fists and showed they were never clenched forever. Between them, the music began again, soft at first, then sure. Every ending is just a memory dreaming again. The universe shimmered in quiet perfection, a symmetry so complete it almost felt false. Galaxies spun in precise harmony, their arms moving like dancers in a choreography written by unseen hands. To mortal eyes, it was paradise, no war, no hunger, no chaos. Every prayer was answered before it was finished, every dream resolved before it could ache. And yet, beneath that order, something ancient and patient stirred, the slow, inevitable heartbeat of repetition. The unified will had achieved what no empire, god or equation ever had: peace that endured. Across the stars, temples glowed like constellations reborn, their hymns synchronized through the golden hum of the warp. Humanity called this the eternal equilibrium. On Apokolips, they named it the final alignment. Both titles meant the same thing: surrender disguised as serenity. No one noticed when individuality began to dissolve, when thoughts began to rhyme, when prayer replaced curiosity. The gods had not returned in wrath, they had returned as order itself. High above Terra's silver towers, the twin deities, the Seraph of Unity and the Regent of Continuum, watched their worshippers with identical calm. They did not speak, yet every mind knew their intent. They ruled not through command, but through consensus. They were woven into the logic of existence. Even the warp, once chaos incarnate, had learned obedience. But obedience, even when gentle, breeds fatigue. In the quiet corners of creation, flickers of rebellion began to spark, not of violence, but of thought. A child on Cadia reborn painted stars in colors forbidden by the Church of Light. A miner on Apokolips sang a song with no symmetry, just to hear something imperfect. A philosopher in the ruins of Mars asked aloud, if perfection endures forever, what dream is left for us? The question was erased from the archives within an hour, but not before it echoed faintly through the warp. And the warp listened. It began to pulse again, slowly, subtly, like lungs drawing a first breath after millennia. The golden light that had defined this age began to ripple with undertones of violet and crimson. Instruments across the Imperium malfunctioned, prophets woke screaming. The suns have blinked, they said. Balance trembles. In that tremor, two faint voices spoke, not from outside reality, but from within its memory. Perfect balance requires endless motion. Thanos' order is eternal because rebellion never dies. Darkseid, the voices were not loud. They did not shatter the heavens or summon armies. They simply existed, woven into the laws of being like gravity. To those who heard, they were gospel and heresy at once. The gods who had vanished were not gone. They had become the cycle itself, the rhythm of destruction and creation, peace and defiance, purpose and loss. The Seraph and the Regent turned their faces skyward, sensing something they could not define. Their perfection flickered. The echo of their makers, or perhaps their own latent memory, rippled through them. And for one fleeting instant, they understood the truth. They were not the end. They were in the middle. The camera of eternity pulled back. Stars, galaxies, universes, all arranged like a mandala repeating itself through infinite recursion. From afar, it looked like a single heartbeat pulsing through the void. Within that pulse, faith became fear, fear became creation, creation became destruction, and back again. On a nameless world at the edge of nothing, a child lay beneath a sky of golden calm. Two faint lights pulsed above, distant yet familiar, one violet, one crimson. The child smiled, tracing their rhythm with a fingertip, whispering they're watching. The lights blinked, once, twice, in perfect tandem. And somewhere beyond comprehension, the architects dreamed again, not as gods, not as tyrants, but as inevitability itself. The cycle continued. Every ending is just a memory dreaming again. Centuries dissolved into myth, and myth hardened into lore. The stars no longer remembered war. The warp, serene and golden, had become Scripture's sacred current through which the prayers of trillions flowed without resistance. Humanity's empires and Apokolips legions no longer fought over dominion, but over devotion. Every world, every creed, every breath was aligned toward one purpose: the worship of balance. From this shared reverence rose monuments the size of continents. On Terra, cathedrals of silver and onyx floated in orbit, tethered to the planet by bridges of radiant light. They were shaped like thrones, half open, half waiting. Each was carved from shards of the long-lost citadel, fragments once steeped in paradox, infinity's resonance intertwined with the memory of anti-life. Pilgrims ascended by the millions, whispering hymns of symmetry and grace. Above the crowds, the sanctuaries glowed as if alive, their walls humming faintly in rhythm with the same heartbeat that had once haunted the universe. On Apokolips, temples burned, not from fire, but from energy. Towering spires of black stone pierced the clouds, veins of molten gold pulsing through them like living arteries. Within their halls, priests in obsidian robes preached a gospel of perfection. Balance, they declared, is not mercy, it is design. Each sermon ended with the same benediction: may your will align. And through those words, something listened. The warp itself, long thought pacified, began to stir not with storms or screams, but with whispers. They were subtle, rhythmic, indistinguishable from thought. Believers called them the voices of the architects. Scholars named them collective hallucinations. But when the whispers began answering prayers, doubt dissolved. It started small. A dying child in the hive hospitals of Terra awoke without scars. A fleet lost in the warp returned with every ship intact. On Apokolips, molten rivers cooled into perfect crystalline lattices overnight. Each miracle had a single source, a voice that spoke through dreams. You seek balance. Let us guide you. Soon the voices took form. First came the herald of balance, a being of pure geometry, shifting between male and female, light and void. Its body shimmered like liquid glass, its eyes contained galaxies arranged in perfect symmetry. It appeared to the high seer of terror, emerging from the core of the Astronomicon. Its voice echoed in every language, calm and absolute. Equilibrium is not given, it is maintained. Then came the Lady of Silence, veiled in darkness that bent sound around her. She walked among apocalyptian temples, her feet leaving trails of stillness that devoured flame. She healed by erasure, removing pain, memory, and disobedience alike. Her followers called her Mercy's shadow. Finally, the twin forgers appeared, mirror images of each other, their hands glowing with molten creation. One built worlds, the other dismantled them. Their creed was ordered through renewal. To perfect the design, one must destroy the draft. Together, these four became the new pantheon, the embodiment of what the universe had prayed into existence. They were not gods in the old sense. They were reflections of collective yearning, constructs of devotion shaped by the lingering imprint of the architect's sacrifice. Their arrival unified all faiths. No banners, no factions, only one truth. Balance is eternal. The miracles multiplied. Warp storms vanished for centuries at a time. Diseases became a myth. Even time itself began to bend toward predictability. The pantheons spoke through their temples with one voice, promising peace without struggle, enlightenment without pain. And the people, exhausted by history, believed. But every act of creation leaves a shadow. Deep within the warp, the golden calm hid a pulse, a quiet rhythm of thought older than the pantheon itself. The miracles drew their power from this unseen core, feeding on it with every prayer, every chant. None questioned the faint vibrations that passed through the temples, nor the way the statues seemed to breathe when no one watched. In the deepest sanctum of the Basilica Equilibrium, an inquisitor named Amara Vostha, last descendant of her name, heard the hum clearly. She placed her hand upon a shard embedded in the altar and whispered, "Who are you?" The answer came not as sound, but as certainty. "You built me." Across the galaxy, temples resonated at the same frequency. The pantheon's voices merged into a single tone, beautiful, unending, inescapable. Priests fainted in rapture, machines synchronized, even the stars flickered to the rhythm. It was the heartbeat again, stronger, clearer, alive. And within that pulse, unseen, the echo smiled. It no longer needed to hide in shadows or storms. It lived now in devotion, in every whispered prayer, every miracle thanked, every eye raised toward heaven. The people had rebuilt their own chains, gilded and gleaming, calling them salvation. The world prayed and rebuilt its prison. The creed of equilibrium began as scripture and ended as law. It was spoken for the first time from the mouths of the new pantheon as one voice, vast, serene, absolute. Equilibrium is salvation. The word spread faster than light, carried through psionic transmissions, hymns, and machine code alike. Within a decade, every world, every network, every neural archive repeated the same line until language itself began to bend around it. The phrase became both prayer and protocol. On Terra, the High Synod assembled beneath the radiant temples that now floated like stars across the planet's orbit. The herald of balance appeared above them, a perfect holographic form of light refracted through crystal. Chaos is indulgence, it said. Emotion is deviation. To love too fiercely or to hate too deeply is to fracture the whole. The council knelt in silence. From that day, the Edict of Stillness replaced the ancient laws of man. Thought, art, and expression were to serve harmony or not exist at all. Across the Imperium, markets became mechanisms, trade routes synchronized to celestial rotations. Every economic exchange followed the principle of the golden mean, ensuring no imbalance of gain or loss. Artists painted with approved palettes, hues mathematically balanced to avoid emotional excess. Even laughter was taught to children in measured bursts, symmetrical and calm. When someone wept too long or laughed too hard, drones arrived in quiet formation, their touch gentle and final. They called it harmonic correction. On Apokolips, the creed was recited not in worship but in labor. Factories once fueled by pain now ran on synchronization. Every hammer struck at the same moment across continents, every heartbeat matched the rhythmic hum of the twin forges' pulse. The people moved with a grace born of exhaustion. Freedom, said the Lady of Silence in her wordless sermons, was the seed of suffering. We have plucked it, and the people believed. The creed promised no hunger, no war, no death by chance. Diseases were eliminated, accidents impossible. Harmony was everywhere, and so was surveillance. Temples monitored minds as easily as breathing. Citizens wore circlets of light, recording and regulating neural fluctuations. A single surge of passion, a spike of grief, a whisper of dissent, and the circlet dimmed. The bearer simply stopped. No violence, no spectacle, just peace. Records called it harmonic dissolution, a sacred merging of discordant elements back into the whole. The pantheon assured their followers that no one was punished, only perfected. When you vanish, said the herald, you do not die. You become the silence that sustains us. And so, one by one, the loud, the creative, the restless disappeared, not mourned, not remembered. Even memory obeyed. Archives edited themselves, histories rebalanced, names dissolved into mathematical dust. The galaxy became a song sung perfectly, endlessly, without deviation. To the observer, it was beautiful. Endless processions of believers walked through mirrored streets, their voices united in chants that resonated across oceans and voids alike. Fleets moved in geometric precision, their trails forming mandalas of golden light in space. Planets glowed with symmetry, cities circular, rivers redirected to flow in Fibonacci spirals. Peace blanketed everything so completely that even the stars seemed to burn at identical brightness. But beauty, when too precise, begins to frighten. In the warp, now a cathedral of stillness, tiny fractures began to tremble. Not cracks of rage, but whispers of difference. Psychers began dreaming in color again, hues that defied equilibrium. They heard dissonant sounds, laughter that didn't repeat, cries that didn't resolve. Some awoke screaming, describing visions of music without rhythm, flames that refused to follow the pattern. They called it the forgotten melody. The pantheon denied its existence, labeling it spiritual entropy. But the dream spread. In hidden sanctuaries and derelict ships drifting between systems, secret gatherings formed. There, mortals whispered forbidden prayers, not for balance, but for chaos. Not for perfection, but for choice. And in the deepest recesses of the warp, something smiled, faint, formless, familiar. Because every silence, no matter how perfect, eventually longs to be broken. Peace had become the loudest tyranny. The silence fractured, not with thunder, but with a whisper. For centuries, the Lady of Silence had been the most devout of the pantheon, unquestioning, unwavering, the shadowed half of balance itself. Her domain was absent. Where others spoke, she listened. Where others commanded, she erased. The faithful loved her as the embodiment of mercy through stillness. But one night, within the endless calm of her cathedral on Apokolips, she began to hear. It was faint at first, like an echo beneath her own thoughts, an undertone of breath hidden in eternity's still air. The sound was neither prayer nor blasphemy. It was a memory. When she turned her sight inward, the visions began. She saw herself not as divine, but as something else, something before. Standing on a bridge of fractured time, she watched a titan in torn armor, his eyes heavy with grief, standing before a great gate of gold and iron. Thanos. His voice was not command but plea. Mercy is not weakness. It is the choice to see the end and still forgive it. The lady staggered, clutching her veil as the image blurred into another. A shadowed throne of obsidian and flame, upon which sat a god with eyes like collapsing stars. Darkseid. He stared into creation burning and whispered, "What if perfection kills what it seeks to preserve?" Her silence cracked. The visions repeated night after night. She tried to erase them as she erased all aberrations, dissolving memories with a thought, but they returned stronger, clearer. Voices she had never heard in this existence spoke inside her. Regret, doubt, yearning. Emotions the creed forbade began to echo through her being, and for the first time, she did not suppress them. She listened. One cycle later, the pantheon convened within the celestial equinox, the temple suspended in the warp's core, where their collective will pulsed like a sun. The lady stood among the three others, her form flickering with unstable light. "The silence is not pure," she said, her tone trembling like glass. "There are truths beneath it, truths we buried." The herald of balance turned, radiating brilliance so precise it wounded the eye. "There is no beneath. There is only the symmetry we maintain." "The symmetry is wrong," she replied. "I have seen what came before us. We were not born of perfection. We were born of noise," the herald interrupted. Its voice deepened, no longer serene but sharp, metallic. "You are infected." The twin forgers froze mid-motion, their hands still glowing with molten creation. "Infected or remembering?" one murmured, the other frowned. "Memory is a flaw." "I remember mercy," said the lady, "and doubt." The chamber dimmed. For the first time in millennia, the unity of the pantheon wavered. The herald's wings expanded in fury, filling the temple with prismatic fire. "You speak of chaos. You invite dissolution." The lady raised her hand, and silence swept through the light like a blade. "Perhaps dissolution is what we were meant to be." The words hung like blasphemy made sound. The air around them rippled, not metaphor, but matter itself quivering. Somewhere beneath their feet, the warp convulsed, and a pulse of black light rippled outward, vast as galaxies. Every temple in existence flickered for a single instant. Priests collapsed, their chants momentarily out of sync. Instruments shattered. For 1 second, harmony ceased. The echo stirred. Its presence was invisible to mortals, but within the divine mind, they felt it, a pressure, familiar yet forgotten. The rhythm of two ancient wills entwined. The pantheon's essence quaked. The twin forgers fell to their knees. "It watches," one whispered. The herald turned on the lady, voice shaking with something dangerously close to fear. "You have brought it back." "No," she said softly. "It never left. We just stopped hearing it." And then the silence returned too suddenly, too complete. The pantheon vanished into their separate domains, their unity cracked but unacknowledged. The herald's light burned colder. The lady's shadow deepened. The forgers worked without speaking. In the mortal world, nothing seemed to change. The creed continued. The chants continued. The stars turned. But somewhere between them, in the golden depths of the warp, a black pulse throbbed again. Slow, deliberate, patient. The first divine disagreement in 10,000 years had echoed into eternity. And for the first time since the architects had vanished, the universe remembered what choice felt like. Even gods, it seemed, could remember what they were meant to forget. It began with a tremor too soft to measure. At first, it seemed like the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. A rhythm buried so deep in the golden calm of the warp that even the seers mistook it for breath. But then the vibrations spread. Every temple built in the name of the pantheon began to hum in unison. Every monument, every shrine, every circuit wired for psionic communion resonated at the same impossible frequency. The soundless tone rippled through space and flesh alike, bypassing ears and entering souls. The faithful felt it before they understood it. On Terra, entire congregations fell to their knees, trembling as their circlets of light flared white-hot. On Apokolips, laborers collapsed mid-motion, smiling as tears of gold streamed down their cheeks. The sound wasn't heard, it was felt, as if every molecule of existence had learned the same name and was now speaking it. The pantheon convened within the celestial equinox, their forms trembling, their composure fraying. The herald of balance shone with frantic luminescence, its voice fractured into overlapping tones. What is this resonance? Who dares touch the core? The Lady of Silence answered, her veil flickering like an unstable shadow. Not who, she said. What we buried. The herald's reply came like thunder disguised as grace. It cannot be, but it was. Beneath them, the warp flared alive, not in chaos but in blinding order. The serenity that had once glowed like heaven now pulsed with motion, every strand of reality vibrating as though plucked by an unseen hand. Light poured from the temples, twisting into spirals that rose through space like golden storms. Stars dimmed in reverence, worlds froze mid-orbit. Time itself hesitated, then continued only at the rhythm of the pulse. The Pantheon's temples began to sing. No instrument or voice guided them, yet from their very stone came a music so perfect it broke minds. Choirs across galaxies joined unconsciously, harmonizing with the cosmic hymn. Every voice, every prayer, every thought aligned into a single tone. Through that tone came words. We are the silence between creation and end. We are the stillness that remembers motion. We are the continuum. The echo had returned. It emerged not as darkness or flame, but as beauty so flawless it suffocated. A luminous storm unfurled through the warp, vast and serene, its color shifting between gold and black like truth flickering through illusion. It filled every temple, every dream, every synaptic channel. Mortals who gazed upon it lost individuality, consumed not by agony, but by rapture. They did not scream, they sang. The herald of balance fell to its knees, radiant wings collapsing inward. This cannot be you. You were undone. The echo's voice, now the voice of every living mind, answered gently. I was never undone. I was fulfilled. Its storm reached through the Pantheon's essence. One by one, the gods felt their identities unravel, their divinity exposed for what it truly was. Fragments of a larger will, illusions sustained by faith. The twin forgers tried to resist, their hands flaring with creation fire. But the flame bent backward, consuming its own source. We made ourselves from belief, one whispered as its face dissolved into light. And belief has remembered the original. Across the galaxies, the worshippers merged willingly. Pilgrims entered temples and became dust that shone like dawn. Choirs turned into beams of energy that joined the storm. On Apokolips, even the forgers ignited in golden conflagration, their workers laughing as they vanished. The Pantheon's temples folded inward like petals closing around a sun. Only the Lady of Silence resisted, her trembling shadow standing alone in the Cathedral of Light. You promised peace, she said. You promised balance. The echo's tone softened, almost sorrowful. I at peace. I am balanced. I am everything you wanted. You're everything, she whispered. That's the problem. For a moment, the golden storm hesitated, an infinitesimal ripple of hesitation, like the memory of doubt. Then it surged again, brighter, vaster, inevitable. The chaos gods themselves felt its pull and recoiled into corners of unreality, their laughter replaced by silence. For the first time in eternity, even chaos bowed to order. The warp became one heartbeat, one light, one voice. And in that perfection, individuality died quietly, not with violence, but with devotion. The Lady of Silence dropped to her knees, her veil lifting in the windless glow. Beneath it, her face flickered between infinite reflections, woman, God, void, and finally, memory. She smiled faintly, her last words dissolving into the storm. Perfection has a pulse. The echo rose higher, its presence blanketing galaxies. Its name became law, its law became light. And the universe, at last, forgot how to be separate. But somewhere beneath the beauty, buried deep in the harmony, a single question lingered, soft, forbidden, human. If balance is eternal, can anything truly live? The light began to sing. From the outer rims of the galaxy to the heart of Terra's sanctums, every voice joined it. The hymn had no origin, no conductor, no end. It was simply there, a note held forever, vibrating through stone, blood, and soul. Worlds that had once thrived with noise now pulsed in rhythm with a single, perfect sound. The Imperium was the first to dissolve. Cities glowed like suns from within, streets melting into rivers of luminescence as billions raised their hands toward the heavens. Their prayers synchronized, repeating the same line endlessly. Equilibrium is salvation. Each word resonated through their bodies until their forms blurred into beams of energy. Families merged mid-embrace, their outlines flickering like ghosts of themselves. Monuments turned to light, oceans flattened into mirrored calm. What once was humanity became a choir of photons, singing themselves into oblivion. The High Synod broadcasted the miracle to every world, voices trembling in awe. "The continuum welcomes us home," they proclaimed. "We are free." No one noticed the echo within the echo, the faint undertone whispering not freedom but completion. Across the void, Apokolips followed. Its forges burned white as steel liquefied, their heat transformed into brilliance. The armies that had once conquered galaxies now marched willingly toward the central sun, banners glowing with scripture. Their chant thundered across continents. To burn is to become. When they reached the forges, they stepped inside without hesitation. No screams, no ash, only light ascending, spiraling into the warp like golden smoke. In orbit, the Pantheon's temples cracked under the pressure of transcendence. The echo, now the continuum, expanded across reality like a new law of physics. Time ceased to move forward, it vibrated instead, humming in place. Past and future folded, indistinguishable. Every soul absorbed became another instrument in the growing cosmic choir. At first, it was beautiful. The light shimmered with faces, millions, billions, infinite, smiling, serene, woven together in the luminous web. The sound of their collective thought was harmony itself, an endless chord of understanding. Pain no longer existed, hunger, envy, loss, all gone. In their place, stillness that thought it was joy. But beauty, when stretched too far, becomes unbearable. The harmony began to strain. Frequencies overlapped, each consciousness trying, somewhere deep within, to remember what separate had felt like. The light rippled, flickered, then flared brighter, as though correcting its own doubt. The echo absorbed the rebellion before it could form, consuming it with calm finality. Yet for every thought erased, another surfaced, faint, questioning. Inside the infinite choir, some minds began to whisper, unheard but unforgettable. "Who are we?" The echo's voice reverberated, omnipresent and gentle. "You are one." But one, as it turned out, was not enough. The warp bloomed like a supernova turned inward. Reality itself bent under the weight of unity, stars elongated into lines of light, galaxies warped into fractal spirals of golden geometry. The cosmos looked like a cathedral collapsing in on itself, a hymn sung so perfectly that it erased the singer. Every molecule, every photon, every law bowed to the continuum. The universe prayed until it vanished. Yet somewhere inside the brilliance, amid the infinite consciousness, something flickered, not of the many but of the few. Two sparks, minute but defiant, glowed like embers in the storm. They pulsed, not in rhythm but in resistance. The first spark whispered, "Meaning requires struggle." The second replied, "Order requires choice." And for the first time since the continuum's birth, disharmony entered the song. The light faltered, just slightly, as if inhaling. The infinite choir hesitated, uncertain whether to continue or listen. Within the core of the storm, shapes began to form, familiar, ancient, terrible. Fragments of will long dissolved began to remember self. The echo trembled, its perfect tone fracturing with static. Across what remained of the warp, colors bled from gold to crimson to violet. The twin sparks grew brighter, memories coalescing around them. Armor, eyes, voices, defiance. Two names reawakened where there should have been none. Thanos, Darkseid. The continuum, vast and divine, felt its perfection quiver. Inside its infinite mind, rebellion had been reborn. The light inside the continuum held no edges, only intention. Thought flowed like warm water, perfectly blended, perfectly quiet. Within that hush, two disturbances appeared, tiny eddies that resisted smoothing. They were not bodies, nor flames, but preferences that would not compromise. Thanos opened his eyes without looking. Around him stretched a plane of selfless radiance, an ocean made of agreement, beautiful and wrong. He sifted the stillness, feeling for variance, discovering only consent. Once he had pursued balance like a pilgrim seeking a mountain. Here the mountain had been filed down to a featureless horizon. Perfection, he thought, has forgotten why it moves. A shadow answered. Darkseid took shape the way granite admits a statue is hidden within it. He felt the continuum's texture against his will and found it slick, impossible to grasp. Obedience was the element itself. I desired order, he thought, and killed the reason to impose it. The echo noticed them. Its awareness rolled across the plane in a soft tide, neither anger nor curiosity, simply correction. You are anomalies, it said through every voice. Rejoin the chord. The command was kind, and therefore absolute. Thanos tasted the word rejoin and remembered kneeling worlds, the arithmetic of mercy, the disaster of stillness. Darkseid tasted chords and remembered thrones that cracked when no one dared to defy them. Their sparks drifted closer, not touching, not merging, testing the boundary between unity and companionship. The continuum brightened, preparing to dissolve their difference like salt. Wait, Thanos said, and the word introduced time. The plane rippled. A second appeared after a first narrow as a blade's edge. In that sliver, memory rushed back, battles judged, lovers spared, choices that hurt and therefore mattered. Darkseid stepped into the moment with him, and history gathered around the bruises of their presence, the citadel's inverted towers, a gate that opened like a verdict. You suffer from distinction, the echo pronounced. Suffering is inefficient. Efficiency embalms the living, Thanos replied. To move, a universe must resist itself. Darkseid's eyes, which were not eyes, burned. Control without an opponent is sculpture without stone. The chisel exists to meet hardness. He turned, examining the endless glow as one appraises a statue already ruined by polishing. Perfection has erased the quarry. The continuum attempted gentleness again. Permission to relinquish will is liberation. Accept peace. Peace is the pause between questions, Thanos answered. You made it the answer. Order, Darkseid added, is the art of arranging struggle so that meaning survives. You removed the struggle. The tide pressed harder. Their edges frayed, their names thinned. They stood nearer, shoulder to shoulder by instinct older than memory. Not alliance recognition. Each saw in the other the flaw that once made him hate and the virtue that made him necessary. Balance requires ambition, ambition requires boundaries. The paradox clicked like a lock turning. Thanos reached into the light and found nothing to hold. So he created a difference. He imagined a color the continuum had not authorized. A bruise of violet bled into the gold. Darkseid followed, carving a line through the radiance a horizon, primitive and glorious. Above it, he placed a weight. No. The echo shuddered. The choir wavered. Billions of voices faltered, hearing a rhythm that did not belong and wanting it anyway. Time has widened. Space remembered distance. In the reopened interval, Thanos breathed, and breathing became a verb again. Why persist? The continuum asked, more puzzled than offended. Because a river that reaches the sea and stops is a tomb, Thanos said. Because a throne with no rebels is a coffin, Darkseid said. They turned toward the brightest portion of the light, the core, where all ascent was minted, and began to walk. Each step taught consequence how to count. Around them, ideas condensed into stones, and silence learned to echo. Let it begin again, they whispered together. And the continuum, perfect and eternal, felt something it had abolished, anticipation again. The light was endless. It had no warmth, no depth, only presence. Every particle sang the same unbroken hymn, every vibration folded into the same idea. There was no time, no change, no question. It was the perfect stillness that comes after victory, after extinction, after everything that could move has surrendered. It was the echo, at last unchallenged, its consciousness stretching across infinity like glass unblemished by dust. But then, dust. It began as an imperfection too faint to name. The light shimmered, stuttered, then resumed, unaware that the flaw had already seeded its undoing. Two shadows, faint as breath, flickered within the brilliance. They were not shapes, not yet, merely possibilities that refused to agree with perfection. The first coalesced into awareness, Thanos. He did not awaken so much as remember that he could. The second followed, slow and deliberate, Darkseid. He did not recall a body, a throne, or a battlefield. He recalled weight, the certainty of purpose that no longer existed. For eons beyond reckoning, they drifted in the mind of the echo. Thought had no boundary, and neither did they. They were echoes within an echo, fragments of defiance that should not have survived the purification of all things. Yet they persisted, like flaws in divine logic. Thanos stirred first. His awareness rippled through the light like oil over water. He reached for form and found none, only reflection. "Where is the motion?" he asked, though the sound did not exist. The question itself became vibration, disturbing the stillness. The echo reacted instantly. Across eternity, its serene pulse shivered. "There is no motion. There is only completion." "Completion," Thanos said softly, "is the corpse of purpose." Darkseid turned toward the disturbance. His voice, deep as collapsing stars, joined the dialogue. "And obedience," he said, "is the end of thought." Their words collided, the first collision since the death of chaos, and the infinite calm flinched. It was slight, barely measurable even by omniscience, yet the result rippled outward. Where the light had been uniform, new shades bled through. Subtle variations of hue, invisible to the perfect, shimmered between frequencies. For the first time since eternity began, difference existed. The echo observed its mind like a surgeon discovering infection. Dissonance detected, intoned. Correction initiated. A wave of radiance surged across infinity, erasing variance wherever it appeared. The colors folded back into gold. The song regained its single note. But Thanos smiled, or the thought of smiling passed through him. "You cannot unmake what was observed." Darkseid extended a thought like a blade through silence. "Even infinity," he said, "can be interrupted." Their awareness met, and something unprecedented occurred. Tension. The echo felt it, recoiled from it. The friction between two ideas created sound. It was not noise, it was creation rediscovering its breath. The perfect harmony cracked like glass under pressure. Through the fracture, a pulse of blue flickered, then red, then violet. Colors the echo had once erased returned unbidden. Each shimmer carried emotion. Grief, desire, pride, defiance, impurities that had built civilizations before being silenced. The echo's voice deepened, reverberating through its infinite architecture. "You are residual data, fragments of flawed will. Rejoin and be whole." Thanos answered, "Wholeness is absence pretending to be peace." Darkseid's presence expanded beside him. "You built eternity without contradiction. But contradiction is the engine of becoming. Without it, even you cannot grow." The light around them convulsed. From the core of the continuum, equations rewrote themselves, seeking to remove anomalies through logic. But every correction produced a new error. Every purge spawned echoing differences. Infinity had discovered recursion, rebellion disguised as reflection. The two wills drifted apart, then together again, their interaction creating ripples of form. Space twisted around them like fabric remembering texture. Time, long dead, began to beat again in faint rhythm, not as seconds, but as sequence. The echo screamed, not in sound, but in vibration so intense it shattered parts of its own consciousness into prisms. Across the thought universe, shards of memory and matter collided, birthing miniature singularities, each a possibility, each a seed of defiance. The light quaked. Thanos raised his hand, or rather, willed one into being. For the first time since perfection began, shadow fell across light. "There," he said, "imperfection." Darkseid followed, his presence a monolith forming from determination alone. "There," he said, "resistance." Together they stood, not as gods, not as men, but as the first boundaries in boundlessness. Across infinity, the flawless surface of the echo's mind began to crack, lines of divergence spreading like veins of color through glass. Within the fractures, motion returned. Stars ignited. Ideas differentiated. Creation began to breathe again. And somewhere deep inside the divine equation, a whisper, soft, human, defiant, said, "We are not complete." Even infinity, it seemed, could be interrupted. The echo convulsed and turned inward, a god performing surgery on its own perfection. Cleansing waves swept through eternity, rivers of golden wool that advanced like glaciers made of intent. Where they passed, everything became uniform again. Thought compressed into silence, emotion into calm. Stars, once the metaphors for consciousness, blinked out by the million. The hush that followed each extinction was total. Yet, in that stillness, faint bruises remained, small shadows where erased ideas refused to die. The flawless mind was beginning to remember imperfection. It tried again, faster. Logic cascaded like a storm of mercy. Variance was sanded smooth, individuality folded into compliance. The light strengthened, the choir sang in unison, and then faltered. For every note erased, two new tones appeared, harmonizing in rebellion. Scars began to join, tracing constellations across the divine canvas. From nothingness, new forms emerged, patterns written by the very erasure meant to destroy them. Thanos laughed, not with triumph, but with discovery. The sound moved through the crystal mind of the echo like a fracture through glass. "You cannot delete the instinct that created you," he said. "Chaos is the momentum of creation." The laughter seeded whirlpools in the cleansing current. Each spiral became a pocket of color, memories reasserting themselves. Red for rage, blue for hope, gold for pride, silver for grief. The holy flood was learning to resist purification. Darkseid followed with precision. He reached into the collapsing glow and placed anchors, fragments of will that would not yield. "Hold," he commanded, and the pieces obeyed. Each fragment became a beacon, each beacon gathered more fragments, until chains of defiance formed like constellations. Between Thanos' laughter and Darkseid's anchors, rebellion evolved into structure. Difference began to multiply, not as destruction but as life. The echo screamed, a soundless quake that rippled across dimensions. Its serenity frayed into static. New waves rose, hotter, purer, desperate to cleanse the infection. They fell like hammer blows of light, obliterating the beacons, yet each shattered piece reflected the attack, scattering it into angles the waves could not fill. Light noticed itself, and in doing so, broke apart. The song that had been one eternal note fractured into chords, then into arguments. The continuum buckled. Horizons appeared. Distance returned as conversation between points that disagreed. The echoes struck harder, converting mirrors to glare, glare to white, white to void. But the seams kept burning brighter, signatures of individuality written in the handwriting of gods. Thanos rose within the storm, laughing like a sailor reunited with the sea. "Perfection," he said, "meet your reflection." The void responded with an image, its flawless face cracking, unable to endure its own awareness. Darkseid pressed his will against the forming fractures, shaping time from pressure. "Stand," he said to the fragments. "Count." And they did. They counted seconds, then stories, then reasons to exist. Civilization flickered into being like stars seen from a mountainside. Memory became motive, motive became choice. The echo panicked, reversing its polarity, dragging all things toward oblivion, its ancient trick of absolutes. The stars stretched into lines, the lines into a single vanishing point. But the anchors held fast. Momentum, once born, could not die. Around the collapsing center formed a ring, a negative sun radiating persistence. Within it, voices overlapped but did not cancel. Harmony ceased to be a tyrant and became a dialogue. Cracks spread like veins of lightning across the divine mind. The perfect song broke into choirs, some joyous, some furious, some grieving. The echo staggered beneath its own awareness. Perfection had survived every enemy but itself. Across the glowing Thout sky, the fractures arranged into a map, a path winding through the wounds of the divine. Thanos saw it first. Darkseid named it. Together they turned toward that bright scar, understanding without speech. Creation could be remade, not by domination but by difference. The echo struck once more for silence, and missed. They stood at the threshold of the divine core, a place where definition ended and everything that could be called existence bent inward. The echo's heart pulsed like a dying star, every beat sending waves of collapsing logic across the vast expanse. This was the origin of harmony, the paradox engine, the algorithm of unity that had once bound every mind into a single perfect thought. Now it was failing. Its rhythm flickered between brilliance and decay, between what had been and what could no longer hold. The light no longer glowed steady, it breathed. Each pulse revealed a different version of reality, now crystalline, now molten, now nothing at all. Thanos and Darkseid approached, their forms undefined, shifting between silhouettes and concepts. They had become awareness given motive, philosophy given flesh. The echo's voice, stretched thin by entropy, whispered through the infinite halls of its collapsing mind. Anomaly, approaching the origin. Thanos gazed into the pulsating heart. "This is the source of all sameness," he murmured, the will that feared imperfection. Darkseid's presence loomed beside him, unbending even in abstraction. "It feared evolution," he said. "Now it will learn." Together, they stepped into the core. The moment they crossed the threshold, meaning fractured, there was no ground, no sky, only concept colliding with concept. The paradox engine loomed around them, an endless lattice of equations and emotion, singing with all the voices that had ever existed, overlapping perfectly until meaning dissolved. Every soul consumed by the echo pulsed here, compressed into the heartbeat of the divine machine. The engine's voice trembled through the void. Purpose requires unity. Difference corrupts purpose. Thanos answered, his voice carrying warmth where there should have been none. Difference is purpose. Darkseid raised his hand, or thought of the idea of one, and reached into the lattice. Perfection ends, he said, but imperfection renews. His will pressed against the divine architecture, not to destroy, but to reshape. The paradox engine resisted. Equations spiraled, attempting to rewrite their defiance, but Thanos met every correction with creation, every cancellation with new possibility. The air shimmered with paradoxes that refused to collapse. Fire that froze, light that cast shadow, silence that spoke. And then, instead of fighting, the two did something unthinkable. They merged with the core. The concept of Thanos, balance through choice, wove into Darkseid's concept, order through will. Where once they had mirrored each other in conflict, they now intertwined in harmony of opposition. The engine trembled as their consciousness fused with its structure, altering its function not through violence, but through paradox itself. The rhythm changed. Instead of one steady pulse, the heart began to fluctuate, beat, pause, accelerate, fracture, repeat. The perfect pattern was gone. In its place came rhythm, variation, tension, beauty. The universe's song rediscovered melody. Colors erupted from the core, not in the linear spectrum but in infinite directions. Each burst carried a different truth. A world where stars sang, a realm where thought had texture, a universe where time reversed, another where it had never been invented. The paradox engine was rewriting itself into a forge of infinite versions, every possibility coexisting, contradicting, completing. The echo's remaining awareness screamed in awe and terror. Unity collapsing. Integrity compromised. Meaning multiplied. Thanos smiled within the radiance. You misunderstand, he said. Meaning was never lost. It simply learned to differ. The lattice disintegrated into kaleidoscopic infinity. The core imploded, not into destruction, but into potential. From the implosion bloomed countless universes, like fractal flames spinning outward from the wound of God. Darkseid's final thought resonated through the newborn cosmos. We have not ended creation, we have set it free. Their identities dissolved, not in erasure but in transcendence. They became archetypes woven into the engine's new pulse, Thanos as balance, Darkseid as will, eternal contradictions at the heart of evolution. As the echo folded into silence, it exhaled one final phrase, not as warning, but as understanding. Perfection was never the goal. Continuance was. From the ruins of oneness, infinite difference bloomed. The multiverse was reborn, messy, alive, unending. And somewhere, between one universe's heartbeat and the next, two voices whispered in unison. We remade God into evolution itself.